Well, good morning and welcome to the 28th meeting this year of the Rural Affairs, Climate Change and Environment Committee. Members and the public should turn off their mobile phones and Blackberries, etc., as leaving them in flight mode or on silent will affect the broadcasting system. Agenda item 1 is on resource use in the circular economy. And the first item is to take evidence from Professor Walter Staal from Product Life Institute. I welcome Walter to the meeting and ask him if he wishes to make an opening statement just now about the principles that are involved. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me. The agriculture or farmers is an interesting case because we basically have two economic models in competition. One is the industrial production model, the objective of which is to create value added by managing a flow. The other one is the circular economy, the objective of which is to preserve value by managing a stock. In the first case, you need aggressive marketing as a tool. In the second case, it's basically a caring attitude that will give the best results. So a farmer has to work on both levels. On one side, preserving the natural capital, the natural stock, biodiversity, clean water, all these things, and also the skills, the acquired capital in how to do the farming. On the other hand, farmers are forced to produce value, to sell value added, to sell products that the markets want. So they basically, I think it's the only sector that has to optimize the two economic systems in parallel.
So that's where you want to kick off. I'm sure we can then apply these to industry and so on, Professor. So the principles behind a circular economy, can you give us a short discussion about how a circular economy would work then in the wider sense? Because we've got to think about industry, we've got to think about the public sector, we've got to think about all sorts of services if we're going to be applying this in Scotland today.
Managing the circular economy is about managing stocks. And you have the natural stock or capital, you have the human stock or capital, you have the manufactured stock or capital, you have the financial capital. So you have the different levels that you try to optimize. If you are talking about manufactured goods, which is buildings, infrastructure, goods, durable goods, then extending the reusing and extending the service life of goods is the main strategy of the circular economy. This is best done. There is a problem about the circular economy. There's the word economy. So the economics of the circular economy is very important. And the economics tell you that the smaller the loop, the more profitable it is. So if you can reuse a product locally, you will make a better price than if you have to remanufacture it or if you recycle it. So if we look at the economics, then recycling is the least interesting option. It may be necessary to prevent waste, to reduce waste volumes, but from an economics, from a profit point of view, recycling is normally not an interesting option. So that's why, for example, mineral water in bottles is by far the most, environmentally speaking, the most interesting option The problem is that companies like Nestle are global companies, and they want to sell their Perrier or San Pellegrino water worldwide in glass bottle, which means it's complete nonsense. So the big change for Nestle would be to sell Nestle local water as a brand, because you have Highland Springs, you have, I mean, every region in Europe has good mineral water, good drinking water, good mineral water. So it would mean that the big companies, I'm just using Nestle as an example, would have to adapt their marketing, that they no longer use the water brand, but they use the Nestle brand to say, we are capable of finding the best resources, the best sources everywhere, and we sell, ask for Nestle mineral water instead of asking for San Pellegrino, because then you can really use reusable drink containers in a regional context. It doesn't work. If you go to a global context, then it's you have cans, you have plastic bottles. So there is a lot of adaptations if you really want to want to work profitably in a circular economy.
Right. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions to you as we move into the detail of this. So is the cradle-to-cradle approach and the circular economy approach the same thing?
No, I personally don't like the cradle-to-cradle because it implies some kind of mechanism or automatism. The circular economy, I defined the circular economy in 1976 in a report to the European Commission, and the report was actually on the potential for substituting manpower for energy. And the conclusions was that the circular economy compared to the manufacturing economy was exactly that, substituting manpower for energy. So for me, one of the big advantages of the circular economy has always been that it creates jobs and saves huge amount of resource consumption and greenhouse gas emissions in a local or regional economy. And that, if you look at the cradle to cradle, then you look at it as some kind of mechanistic, and the job element is completely missing in the discussion. The second element in a circular economy is that you should give preference to resources that you can upgrade. And among the resources you can upgrade is basically the human resource, because through education, training, you can actually make labor more productive, more creative, and which also means you have to use the labor. Unemployment is not only a waste of resource, it also means normally a loss of skills, and so therefore it's the only resource that degrades when it's not used. The natural resources, farmland, may have a similar effect because you have the different options between planting trees, reforestation, and sheep and arable land. There may be different options, and each of these options has downstream activity. So I think the advantage of reforestation would be highest if you couple it with building up an industry that uses wood in construction, in the high value end of the industrial economy. And so the important thing, I think, don't only look at the circular economy, always put it in the wider economic or societal context of a region.
One of the things that occurs to me is the question about the availability of labour. We know that with falling birth rates in the industrialised world, that some of that has got to be taken up with people migrating in to the kinds of economies that we have, a quite important, component in the future, which raises tensions of another sort. But when you're talking about maintaining the human element in it, I presume that we must be thinking about economies where we try and substitute energy for people, and therefore we've got to find ways of paying these people at a reasonable rate in order that they can live properly to do so. In farming, it's obvious that it's very cheap labour at the harvesting of vegetables, but if it's family farms, then it's a very different kind of approach. How do you think you can optimise the ways in which labour can get a fair return for their efforts? Because we know that machines have taken over so much of what labour used to do. We're not talking about going back to an utterly labour-intensive era, but we are talking in your case about having, a new emphasis on substituting labour for energy use.
I think one of my battle horses of the last few years has been we have to introduce sustainable taxation or sustainable framework conditions, but taxation is part of the framework conditions. And sustainable taxation to me means only tax unwanted things. So tax emissions, waste, consumption of non-renewable resources, all the things that you want to reduce, but don't tax the things you want to promote, such as human labor. And that is one, the main battlefield. The other one is VAT, value-added tax, should only be levied on activities where there is value added. So the circular economy and farming in that sense is preserving values. And any activity which preserves values should not have to pay VAT. Funnily enough, I had a discussion with people from the UK Treasury, and they had no problems with the VAT idea, but they have, like economists, a lot of problems with the labour tax. But taxing labour was introduced in the UK to finance the French-British War. And in France, it was introduced in 1914. So it's normally introduced to fight the war, but then you forget when the war is over, you forget that the reason is gone. So I think if you do not tax labor, the main impact will be on caring, any activity involving caring. It will be education, health, farming, especially organic or biological farming, any labor-intensive or any caring activity is labor-intensive, it's local, you can not do economies of scale. So you would, by not taxing labor, you would not only promote farming or organic type of farming and the circular economy of repairing, reusing, repairing, and remanufacturing products, infrastructures, buildings, you would promote all the other caring activities as well.
Thank you. I think there's other people who want to chip in just now. Claudia Beamish, first of all.
Thank you. Could you highlight for us perhaps why these approaches have not been fully adopted to date?
Sorry, which approach?
The circular economy approach. What would be the barriers to that approach being, which we're very interested in as a committee, that approach being adopted? At what levels would the barriers be, could you say?
Actually, it has been adopted in a growing way, especially over the last years or last 10 years in investment goods. So trucking and anything involving what I call tools, where somebody needs goods to produce income. Most of these approaches have been widely adopted. So the opposite to the tools is the toys, because toys are the consumer market is ruled by fashion. And fashion means bigger, better, faster products, safer, bigger, better, faster, safer products. And if you look at the marketing, you will, or newspapers, you will hardly ever find publicity for car sharing or for rental agreements. Everything is on the new car, which now has 55 airbags instead of 24, and that's always progress. So the marketing is geared on pushing the industrial economy, the selling, the shortening the life cycles, the smartphones. This has started to change because the car sharing, the young generation is fully hooked onto smartphones, but they no longer, at least on the continent, many young people no longer have a driver's license because they don't think they need a car, and so therefore they don't buy cars. Or if they have a driver's license, then they will rent cars, car sharing, all these schemes. So the consumer side is changing to some degree. The manufacturing side is changing. The biggest, I think the most important change that happened, and that is starting to dawn on industry, is that throughout the 20th century, the prices of resources has come down. From 2000 to 2010, there was a huge jump, and now we are higher, the resource prices are higher than 1900. And there is a forecast that this trend will continue. So if in the 20th century, when resources always get cheaper, it made sense to buy resources, produce products, sell them, and forget about it, in the new paradigm of increasing resource prices, it starts to make sense for many companies to retain the ownership of resources. And the only way to retain the ownership of resources is by renting goods or operational leasing, whatever you want to call it, because then the goods in the market is the resources of tomorrow at yesterday's resource prices. So it's completely changing, resource security is completely changing the way the industrial economy looks at it. The role of the state is, I think, a bit difficult. I mean, the role of the state is very much on the resource exploitation, implying the child labor, the environmental issues in South Africa and other regions, and on the waste, the EU Waste Directive 2008 that should now be implemented. But on the circular economy itself, the state, as I said, it could have a big influence through the taxation by not taxing labor or not value-added tax. The EU Commission is trying to promote resource security, resource efficiency, but that's much more difficult than the two ends, the resource extraction and the waste production.
Just briefly, you've emphasized the issue of the aggressive marketing that you highlighted for the economy as the model that we have more now, although you've highlighted the changes as well with, I can understand the model of car clubs, that's a clear example. But where would marketing then fit in? Because in that shift, it would seem that it would need to still have a role, perhaps, and I wonder how that would alter. Because you said a caring attitude, but I'm not quite sure where that would fit with marketing models.
Okay, let's take the global companies. They are squeezed because the circular economy is basically a model, an economic model for markets with near the point of saturation. So it's basically industrialized countries. But the huge markets in China, India, that are far away from saturation, the traditional model of creating waste through more products, better products, more infrastructure, more schools, is still the right way to increase the quality of life. So for a company like Nestle or Mercedes-Benz, whatever, it's kind of, they would have to develop a split personality to do the pushing the sales in the emerging markets and having a conserving attitude, preserving attitude in the developed markets. And that is, in any company, it's very difficult to have two models competing with each other. The caring attitude. If you look at certain publicities, for example, Audemars Piguet, it's normally expensive products. The Audemars Piguet, which is an expensive watch, their publicity for a long time has been that you never buy an Audemars Piguet for yourself. You don't own it, you safeguard it, you look after it for your children. And so this caring basically excludes fashion. Caring means you have quality that you then keep. I call this the teddy bear effect. That, for example, I have a lot of teddy bears. My watch is more than 50 years old, and the pens I'm using, all these things are goods I probably have had for 40 or 50 years. They were normally given as a present, so I have a link to the person who gave it to me. I have two cars that go back to, that are produced in 1969. And so if you develop a relationship with goods, then the value of this good is more than only the function. And I think this is what the traditional manufacturing industry has successfully destroyed, that you should not have any kind of personal relationship with a house, with furniture, with goods around you, but simply it's a toy. Enjoy it until you get a better one. And caring attitude basically means that you recreate or you revalue these personal links to goods, because then you don't throw it away. And of course you buy quality, because otherwise it doesn't make sense to buy a cheap disposable thing and then keep it for your life.
Thank you.
Graham Day.
Thank you. Could you outline for us the challenges that exist for government to try and take forward a circular economy approach? I mean, is it general mindset? Is it consumer habit? Is it the unwillingness of industry and manufacturing to change their practices? What are the major challenges?
I think the major challenge is this shift in the minds of people, that waste is not a problem inherent in the product. Waste is a problem in the minds of people. So if I no longer want something, that doesn't mean that this product has become waste. The important thing, therefore, is to educate people that if you are fed up with something or you no longer want it, you have a moral or ethic, whatever obligation, to find another user, another buyer. And if you look at eBay, this is basically the success of eBay, is that it's a huge global market for trading used goods. The other challenge is, there are several ones. Another one is that in the minds of people, new products are of superior quality than used or remanufactured goods. There is a number of examples. There is an OECD report that stipulates that if you have young children, you should preferably buy used clothes, because they produce less allergies through the fact that they have already been washed a couple of times than new clothes. Now, if you promote these kind of things, you will immediately be hit by the industry manufacturing new clothes, because you can say the same thing for certain technical goods, engines, car engines or truck engines. The remanufactured ones are actually of a higher quality and last normally longer. Caterpillar, there are good statistics from manufacturers who also remanufacture. But these things are taboo because you would attack the main issue of the industrial economy, that new goods are better than used ones. And the third issue is a regional economy to sell the idea that a regional economy using regional resources, and that includes the manufactured stock, and regional labor, skilled labor, is creating a valuable regional economy, which is only part of the total economy. You would always have new products, life sciences, nanotechnology, which are innovative, creative, use much less resources, normally also produce a higher value added. So as a government, I think you have to push both. On one side, better management of existing stocks, but that is difficult to export, and new products that can be revolutionary technology that you then can export, that you can reach out. So it's, again, in one way, a split personality maybe, that do one but also push the other one.
So if I make it clear, isn't timing a problem as well? Because right now we're in difficult economic circumstances, and inevitably people will tend to buy the cheapest good rather than the best quality, even though in reality that's a false economy. So isn't timing, when we're in the middle of a recession or just coming out of a recession, whichever you believe, isn't timing a problem right now?
I think it's more a sociological problem. There was a book 10 years ago called The Multi-Option Society that showed that people today, they always want to keep all the options open. They don't want to take decisions. Of course, there is Freddie Mercury's famous song, "I want it all and I want it now." So if you combine this with multi-option, then you have complete mess, because people, especially young people, take loans to buy things they don't really need, but they think they might need it or want it, and they don't want to buy high-quality goods, because then they lose the multi-option. So I think it's partly an education problem, a value problem, and then of course you come to the philosophy. How should we educate young people to teach them that, how do you define what you need, the basic needs, and then how do you focus on quality? And it's the same in human relationships. think twice before you buy something, but then buy something that may be durable. So it's in a wider context, but the consumer society is very much within, especially young people.
Thank you.
Alec Ferguson.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Professor. If a company decided it want to adopt the circular economy approach, what would be the main challenges it faced? Is it similar challenges in terms of mindset change and behavioural change, as you've just described, facing a government or a state, or are there different challenges that any company would face? And if so, how would it go about overcoming them?
The main problem is that you cannot normally profitably work in two worlds. So if you want to change to a circular economy, you have to give up the throughput model. And one of the nice examples of the problems you face when you do this is Rolls-Royce. When Rolls-Royce changed from model of selling jet engines and spare parts to airlines to selling power by the hour. In other words, putting at the disposal of airlines the service of jet engines, getting paid a fixed fee per hour. And that, in the beginning, meant they had to buy back all the engines and spare parts in the market. So there was a huge capital outlay to become owner of the fleet of goods. And then the income, of course, was smaller if you rent engines. The annual income is in the beginning smaller than if you buy engines and you get a huge sum. But the Rolls-Royce then very quickly realized they had to completely change their business model. Because if you are selling power by the hour, basically you no longer want spare parts. Spare parts is a huge waste of money and inefficiency. So you want spareless repair technologies. And you have to monitor in-flight engines so that you can avoid breakdowns and broken engines. In the new model, now you make more profits by prevention. You basically want to have these engines running, and so you have to make sure you have the least possible costs in repair and in maintenance. So it's a complete change in mindset, and that takes time. Once you have done it, then you are much better off. But the changeover is a difficult moment.
Do you think it requires basically government stimulus to introduce that change of mindset, or do you think this will come from the bottom up?
I think that there are both cases. In big international companies, they probably don't need the government stimulus. The issue is for small and medium-sized enterprises, because the small and medium-sized enterprises normally lack the knowledge and overall view. And so I think there it would be very useful if the government, together with possibly universities, could provide some kind of data bank where SMEs can look at how did other companies do it, what are successful models, what are the new capabilities, the new skills you may need, and where can I get those? And I think clusters, if you can produce clusters of universities and companies that might become active in this, then there's also an incentive for young people to study this, because they can see where the jobs are, and for the companies to see where they will get the people they need. So one trick may be to attract, there's a number of companies like Caterpillar and that are already active in this field. But by announcing that you want to go into promoting, as a government, promoting a circular economy, and by producing these kind of clusters between academia and industry, you might attract companies that are willing to go this step to come to Scotland for that reason.
Thank you very much. Convener, I had another slightly different topic I wanted to ask about, but I think some people might have
supplementaries. Then we'll come to that for sure. Claudia Beamish and then Nigel
Thank you,
Don.
Convener. Professor, could I ask you about the place of the eco-industrial park in the discussion we're having about businesses, and whether you think that government would need to kickstart something like that, or whether there's a different way in which that could happen?
I'm a bit skeptic from a risk management point of view of eco-industrial parks, which is basically that one company uses the waste of another company as a resource. The German Democratic Republic was the biggest eco-industrial park that ever existed, because they had to do with what they have. Everything was based on coal. Everything was based on basically pork and other centralized agriculture. And when the German Democratic Republic in 1889 changed to a market economy, the reason why the whole economy collapsed was that it was sufficient for Western industrialists to buy certain parts of this chain production, and with that they destroyed the chain, and then the whole thing collapsed. So it's the same thing in an eco-industrial park. If you have one company, one of the major companies, that decides to change the module, the production process, whatever, the product, or even goes bankrupt, then another company or other companies may have the problem that they now have to source new resources, that they have lost the access. So I'm all for looking at the total, but you should never fully depend from a risk management point of view on one supplier of any resource, any product, as any part.
Thank you.
Nigel Don.
Convener, and good morning, Professor. I'm just wondering if I can go back in my life for rather more than 20 years to the days when I used to work for a little business called Unilever. And I'd like to use my experience of that, and of course I know nothing of what they're doing now, just to ask you about how businesses might work nationally and internationally. Back in the days when, for example, I made detergents, though it hardly matters that it was detergents, there was a business based in the United Kingdom, and there were many other businesses based around the world. Now, I think you indicated earlier that it would be very difficult for a business to have two different mindsets, but it does seem to me that it would be perfectly possible for one business that's based in the United Kingdom to have one mindset, particularly if it felt it had the resources there, and others in other markets or places to have a different mindset. The only difficulty that I think the company overall would have been profitability. Because I think if the UK business had been able to generate its 8% or whatever, the board in head office would frankly not have worried how it would achieved it as long as it was ethical. So is it that difficult for international businesses to have different models in different places?
I don't think it's difficult. The problem is in the mindset of economists, the economy of scale, that if you produce something globally in one factory, then the cost will be lower, and as the cost of transport is more or less zero. I mean, 20-foot ISO container shipping from China to Europe is something like $6, so the cost of transport is zero. What all these economy of scale calculations never take into account is the catastrophic risk. I discovered with the discussion of the solar storms, for example, that could destroy, if a solar storm would hit the northern hemisphere, and that it will only hit northern hemisphere, it could knock out several transformers of the high tension electricity transfer lines. And okay, then you simply need new transformers. Delivery time for these transformers is about 1 year, and there's only one company left, very efficient, producing transformers in South Korea. So, you know, if you think about it, it's absolutely crazy. Europe, the United States, we all no longer produce transformers because the South Koreans are more efficient. So we have completely lost on a national, on a policy level, but also on a corporate level, the strategic importance of having regional, national, whatever, manufacturers. Think about Eyjafjallajökull, the famous volcano, or the March 11, the tsunami in Japan, the floods, 6 months later, the floods in Bangkok. Every time, some of the companies that were, well, the volcano, where it was transport that came to a standstill, the March 11 and the Bangkok flood both destroyed unique companies producing a single component, for example, for the car industry. And the result was that, for example, certain Volkswagen models were no longer on sale for, I think, 6 or 8 months. So the industry is learning that maybe it's not such a good idea to have a global supply chain that becomes very vulnerable. I think Unilever is, the food people are normally better than the car people, because food, people partly want local food. And the porridge in Scotland, you eat porridge, but in Asia you don't eat porridge. So the food market is much more local, regional than the companies would like. Still, the organic farming, there is a trend on the continent, I don't know if about the UK, that people go back to farms to buy food or have contracts with farmers to supply them seasonable food. So that change in the food chain, that change is happening, that regional and seasonal food is actually more fun, more exciting, more whatever. It's slowly happening, but mainly, of course, in the people that don't have to buy the cheapest food.
Yeah, okay. Could I just go back to the basic point, though, because it seems to me that the issue of, and Unilever does, or did have, very local manufacturing for most things, actually. The issue really is the ability to make a profit, probably in the reasonably short term, to persuade a business that it could have a different model. Is there any evidence that that can't happen?
Well, you always have the global players in competition with regional or national players, and they normally have similar competitiveness or profitability. I think it's really the corporate strategy people believe that global branding, global production, global products is in the long term the winning proposal. And as long as, especially global branding, if you cannot convince them that have a series of regional or national companies that are as profitable and competitive, then they will always go for the global branding.
Yeah. Jim Hume now.
Yes, thanks, Convener, and good morning, Professor Still. You mentioned some companies, eBay, Rolls-Royce Engines, the concept of more car leasing, and Caterpillar as businesses that have actually, to some extent, started working with a circular economy. I just wonder if there's any businesses out there that have fully embraced the circular economy approach. And also it'd be interesting, from a Scottish perspective, obviously, if other countries have started or have embraced the concept of a circular economy.
The circular economy is a term that can be interpreted differently. So at the moment, the lead, if you go into internet, the leading country in the circular economy is China. And whereas we don't really look at China as a circular economy, but I think the difficulty for, or the reason why circular economy is different in different countries is that it's basically based on using existing capital, existing stock. And in most cases, the stock is the stock of manufactured goods and of people, human capital. And if you look at also in the US, what is one of the big problems looking at manufactured stock, then in almost all countries, the industrialized countries, it's the neglect of operation and maintenance. Our roads, our water systems, our sewage systems, they are all maybe 50 or 100 years old, and they are falling apart. So the big challenge is to bring a proper operation and maintenance in infrastructures, for example, or in government buildings, adapting existing building stock to energy requirements, energy saving requirements. There is a huge market there because we have neglected these stock for a long time. The companies, there are a lot of local companies that, or regional, national companies that thrive on either renting goods. For example, Childen Furniture is one area where in Germany high-quality wooden furniture for babies has become a fashionable thing because the baby cots, all these things, you use them for 1 year, 2 years, and then what you do with it. So instead of buying, but you would like a nice one, so instead of buying a nice one, you rent one and then give it back and rent another one. One of the big fashionable things at the moment is ladies' handbags. If you are a young lady, you would like to have the latest Gucci, whatever handbag every weekend, but you cannot afford these things that cost from £3,000 upwards. However, you can rent them for maybe £50, and so you get every weekend, you get another very expensive handbag and so you're really the king of fashion. Because it starts to dawn on people that if you want change, the same with Ferraris or other expensive cars, if you always want a new one to impress your friends, then the last thing you can afford is buying them, so rent them, because nobody will know if it's rented or bought or whatever. So this is one of the drivers of this new economy, that people who are very fashion conscious but have not so much money realize that you can actually buy the illusion for your peers by renting goods.
Yeah. Fascinating. Yeah.
Angus MacDonald.
Okay, thank you, Convener. Good morning, Professor Still. I'm sure our colleagues Claudia Beamish and Jane Baxter have taken note of the Gucci handbag proposal. There may well be a social enterprise coming up pretty soon. Professor Stahl, your comments regarding the need to improve infrastructure are certainly noted. And you've mentioned earlier this morning proposals like not taxing labour and only taxing unwanted things. Now in Scotland you'll be aware that we don't have complete powers over tax at the moment. However, the Scottish Government, Zero Waste Scotland and Scottish Enterprise are actively engaged in exploring and implementing activities that could help build a more circular economy. However, there's currently no single circular economy plan or strategy for Scotland. So I'd be interested in hearing your views, although you've already touched on some, on what priorities Scotland specifically should pursue over the short, medium and long term in progressing a more circular economy.
The circular economy, if you look at it on the very general level, basically allows you to build a more resilient economy, more resilient communities. And so you can take any area, for example, energy, the trend goes for a national grid or even a European grid, the same as with Unilever, to have a always bigger system to manage centrally. Whereas if you look at it from a risk management or sustainability perspective, you would be much better off with diversified energy production. In other words, have combined, depending on the regional energies available, combined geothermal with wind, with tidal, photovoltaic to some degree. If you use photovoltaic, then don't do it the German way. To feed everything, photovoltaic is 12-volt direct current. Now, if you feed this into the national grid, you have a lot of transformation losses. But of course, if you use it you can easily convert your home to 12-volt DC. All the technologies available from the camping car market, all that is 12-volt DC. So you get energy-saving light bulbs, you get anything at a cheap price, 12-volt DC. But if you convert your home to photovoltaic using truck batteries, then the utility companies loses you as a customer, and certainly they don't profit from photovoltaic. So we have the same problem again, that the big players want everything to feed into the big system. Whereas from a decentralized, if you want to build resilient communities, then you are much better off by having locally independent units that then work up to the grid, but it shouldn't be that the grid dictates the way that the local units are functioning. So it's basically bottom-up versus top-down, and at the moment, in most cases, it's the top-down that wins, also with governance issues, whereas being a Swiss from the fan of direct democracy, I have to tell you that the bottom-up solutions are normally much more lasting and sustainable and resilient. Did I lose your question, or did I answer your question?
Well, you partly covered it. Are there any other examples of how we could progress? I mean, you've covered the energy sector. Any other examples of how we could progress to a more circular economy?
Well, certainly for manufactured goods, that is something, there is a huge volume of manufactured goods. So again, the top-down approach that was very popular in the last years was the cash for clunkers, that you should, any car that's older than 8 years should be scrapped and give people a bonus that 5,000 euros, whatever, to buy a new car. in a circular economy, a much more intelligent policy would have been to say we give people 5,000 euros if they replace the polluting engine of their car. So in other words, either have the engine remanufactured or replace a diesel engine with a CNG engine, which is basically the same technology, because then you would have much higher impact on local employment, because all these conversions would have been locally. You would have a much higher impact on pollution, because you didn't have to produce new cars. And in the utilization of the cars, you would have a better impact than replacing 80 cars by new cars with the same technology. We did a calculation also on the resources going into scrapping the cars and producing new cars. Applying the circular economy instead of the cash for clunkers would have made a huge impact on the local economies, on the environment, but politically probably you could not have pushed it, because the car industry would have gone on the barricades by, of course the industrial economy wants you to throw away functioning products and buy new ones, because that fuels the industrial economy, but it's not the best approach.
Okay, thank you. Dick Lyle?
I've listened intently, Professor, to your concept. We've had, industrial revolution. We've had the consumer society. We basically live on a factor of need, as you say, and sometimes greed. I want this handbag, or I want that jacket, or I want that car, or whatever. But that's based on the factor that, from 200 years ago, people come off the land, they then manufactured goods, they then earned a wage, they then could go and buy something else, which then created other jobs. Does your concept basically, from my mind, mean that you would circularize everything within a region, and the region would use all the products, manufacture all the products? You've got a lot of companies who have centralised into one big factory for the whole of the country, but basically you're suggesting that they could actually devolve down into just a region, and would that not then make people more, I can see the concept, because at the end of the day it's going to reduce pollution, it's going to reduce movement, it's going to ensure that people use within the regional society. Is that basically, I've got the handle on, that's what you're meaning?
No, we cannot produce everything locally or regionally. If you think that Europe no longer produces mobile phones, because Nokia has been sold to Microsoft, so now mobile phones are only produced in North America and in China and South Korea. So, and there are many other products like this. So I think we should take advantage of large-scale manufacturing, low costs, to import products, but we should have a better quality control of what we want, that we want quality repairable, basically repairable goods. And if we import repairable goods, then we can also do the operation maintenance, the repairs locally. So we should try to, as a policy, to get the best products, but then develop an industry to do an economy that does the reuse and remarketing properly, that can do the repair and remanufacturing properly, using the stock we have, then to last it as long as possible, and at the end recycle the materials, which is a strategic stock, instead of if I've correctly understood, what's basically happening in Scotland is you import a lot of goods and you export a lot of waste. And the circular economy would basically mean look at the region as an enterprise and close the loops in the sense that the material, the waste that is exported, look at this as a resource and find ways to make new products, new value out of the waste.
It's interesting the point you made about renting. Actually, if you go back to the 60s and 70s, people rented a television, people rented a hi-fi or whatever, and I agree on you know, most of the places I go with when my wife is throwing anything out is take it to the charity shop for people to reuse it, because I abhor the fact that you're throwing something into a skip or into a dump when it could be used by someone else. Your concept is quite interesting, and I thank you for answering my question.
Okay, let me just give you some more examples where consumers are buying use, are buying utilization without very often realizing it. It's all the rent a car, rent an apartment, taxis, public spaces such as roads, hotel rooms, libraries, concert cinemas, internet, public transport. In all these cases, you don't actually buy something, but you buy the use. And so it's more important to make people aware that this concept, also with SMEs, is not a revolutionary new thing that will endanger all the things you have done in the past. If you go into a hotel, I always tell people that the quality issue, you never ask if in the bed, who has been sleeping in the bed last night? Was it Idi Amin Dada? He was one of the, or one of these other dictators, because you trust the hotel that they will maintain the quality of the service they provide. And in most cases, the hotel is actually not owning the linen, and bed linen and the towels, but they are owned by a textile leasing company. Because the hotel doesn't want to, it's not the core business of the hotel, whereas it's core business of the textile leasing company. And then to come back to the former question, textile leasing companies, they are very intensive to deliver and take back the goods almost every day. So the radius of efficiency is 60 miles, 90 kilometers. So you have a lot of regional or even local textile leasing companies simply because the transport limits the efficiency. And you will never have a global textile leasing company. So very often inherent in the concept of selling services is that you have to be close to the client, whereas in the concept of the industrial production, you can be at the other end of the globe. So if you take an airplane, people don't realize that they get a ticket and a reservation from the airline, but the airline doesn't own the aircraft. The stewardesses' uniforms are owned by a textile leasing company, not by the airline. The food is provided by a catering company. So all these businesses are basically selling services and buying services. The public procurement could have a very big influence by buying services. If you go to the website of the Pentagon or of NASA and you look at procurement, the preferred procurement of all these US administrations is buying services. The space shuttle will be the last piece of hardware that NASA has owned and operated. All the future business services, they are buying services. So the public procurement can have a very strong influence on industry and on creativity. Because if public procurement means we buy services, then there is immediately huge competition of startup companies how to provide these services.
We have two very short supplementaries just to sort of round things off, although that particular area I think was a very good overview of where we can see rent rather than buy as one of the things which governments can look at very seriously, and this government particularly. Claudia Beamish has a point to make, a short point.
I think
very short point.
Thank you. It will be very short, I assure you. I think in relation to the public procurement bill that's coming up in Scotland, this has been a very helpful conversation, and thank you for that as well. I just do have to take us back to the renting, though, which I fully adhere to as a concept for moving us forward. However, just in terms of Gucci handbags, I just think I have to respond to Angus MacDonald's point and put into the dialogue that that is still the consumer society and encouraging all that side of things. So just to take you right back to the beginning of your conversation, you talked about special things, and this was given to me by my school when I left after 10 years when I became an MSP. The handles broke, so this is now plumber's tubes, which my partner put onto it. So I just leave us with that thought.
Recycled.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. And Graham Day.
Follow that. Can I take you back to the point you were making about the national grid? Here in Scotland, 24/7, 365 days a year, through the national grid, we export electricity to England and Northern Ireland. That allows the lights to stay on and industry to continue in these places. And we do that from a range of energy sources with an increasing move towards greener contributions to the energy mix. And that plan, the plan is to continue with that if Scotland votes for independence. So whilst I understand your point about a local focus in this regard, isn't a national grid absolutely essential and in fact a good thing?
No, the national grid, or on the continent, the European grid, makes absolute sense to transfer surpluses, to balance demand and supply. But it still would have this function if the regional grids are more independent or stronger. The national grid would like the national grid get paid for by volume. So the more they shift around, the more money they make and the more power they have. So therefore, their prices will go up. If you increase the regional productions, the prices of the national grid will go up, which means there will be more incentive to make regional grids, regional networks. So it's always the same thing. Basically, the big systems have the argument of economy of scale. If you want us to be cheap, then we have to be big. And the other argument is if the national or the centralized solutions are expensive, you give incentives to the circular economy, to using regional systems. If you take the risk management into account, such as catastrophic failure of the national grid, then you realize that if you don't have the regional system, that solar storm is one example where we could have a prolonged blackout of several months, where the national grid has absolutely no remedy. And that, I hope it will never happen, but the chances that it will happen are increasing through probability. And I think that would be a lesson that if you have a local source, actually the biggest promoter of plus energy buildings of these really decentralized one is Major Bloomberg in New York. And he is certainly not a green, but his argument is that if we have more and more buildings that are energy autonomous from the grid, whenever there is a blackout, there is less pressure on the emergency services, police, fire brigade, to get people out of elevators. And there is a higher security because these buildings will remain lit even during a blackout. So he is the big pusher. He wants all new buildings in Manhattan to be plus energy buildings because it takes the pressure off the state and the emergency services.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. We have obviously heard a wide range of things to get us thinking, and I believe also, Walter, that an awful lot more of our colleagues in every other committee in this Parliament should be thinking about these things as well, because it's all interrelated, as we know, joined up, even circular, I guess. But thank you very much for your very stimulating discussion just now. We would like to thank you, and we will end this with a brief suspension at the moment until we can change over witnesses. Thank you. We return to the session and agenda item 2 on the draft budget scrutiny for 2014-15. And today we'll hear from 2 panels of stakeholders. Later we'll hear on a panel on flood protection and alleviation. But our first panel is on the delivery of broadband provision in rural areas of Scotland, in keeping with our remit here. And I want to welcome our witnesses, Brendan Dick from BT, Gavin Stevenson from Dumfries Galloway Council, and Alec Patterson from Highlands and Islands Enterprise. Welcome, gentlemen. So we're going to start with some questions with regard to Next Generation Digital Fund, and how does this and the broader step change programme fit within this £280 million budget? Who wants to kick off? Alec Patterson, yeah.
Thank you for the invitation. I mean, I think the whole Next Generation Fund, which has been set aside, is absolutely critical, and we're all involved in projects that are delivering against that. So, you know, from a Highlands and Islands point of view, we're embarked on the largest, probably the most complex broadband project that the UK has seen. And the Broadband Fund is critically important to enabling us to do that. So £146 million project been rolled out across the Highlands and Islands at the moment in partnership with BT, which will be completely transformational for a region like the Highlands and Islands. Without this, we'd have broadband coverage around about 21% commercial intervention. This will take us up to 84% and hopefully going further than that. So the fund, the allocation of budget for rural broadband is absolutely fundamental to a region like the Highlands and Islands, and you know, we've stopped talking about the desire for it. We're actually making it happen now.
So the step change programme, how does that fit into it?
Well, the step change programme has got a couple of elements to it. There's a project which we're running. We have the contract for the Highlands and Islands, and then the other part of the step change programme is a contract for the rest of Scotland. So both of these contracts are delivering the step change element of the digital strategy.
Anyone? Yeah. Brendan Dick.
Thank you, Chair. I remember just like to add and supplement what Alex is saying. I mean, certainly it's, I genuinely believe as a Scot this is going to be transformational. Clearly it's a massive project, as Alex has said, the Highlands project, and to be frank, both the projects in Scotland are in scale terms massive by British standards. And indeed, when one looks at some of the components that are underlying the ultimate outcome, particularly in the Highlands and Islands with 400 kilometres of subsea cable, I think you may have seen referenced in our submission, 800 kilometres of core backhaul, not only is it going to transform the availability of high-speed broadband for citizens and for small businesses, it will, in addition to that, I believe, transform the capability from an inward investment perspective to encourage businesses into rural Scotland, and it will apply in the southern parts as well, in a way that has been harder in the past. I think that's the first point. I think secondly, the evidence that is coming about across the world, not just in the UK, of the potential economic impact of the exploitation of higher speed broadband as opposed to first generation is already indicating in a recessionary period a good uplift in gross value add, GDP, and so on and so forth. So I think if you look at the step change programme that Alec was alluding to, I think credit to the Scottish Government in a way that is really important is placing equal emphasis on how we're going to exploit this. And certainly, if I can quote an example, recently I was speaking at a business conference in Falkirk in the Enshire Hotel recently, where I was christened and had my wedding, so I know it quite well, to an audience of about 180 SMEs in the Falkirk Council area. And the bulk of that conversation was about what are we going to do with it. Now, clearly, Falkirk's not rural in the way that much of the geography you're concerned is. But nonetheless, the potential, wherever people will be in Scotland running businesses in the communities from Shetland down to the borders, will change, in my opinion.
Yes, indeed, Gavin.
I think perhaps for members it's important to say that the reason that the step change project's in here is because we have market failure. That certainly the attraction for the providers and internet providers to the big cities is because they can make money. The infrastructure costs are much less. The reason that, particularly for this committee, it's so important, and particularly the area that I'm here representing, which is the South of Scotland Alliance, Scottish Borders, Dumfries and Galloway, there's clear market failure. I live in the centre of Dumfries. I have broadband connectivity of less than 2 megabytes, which still means I got a wee clock. I'm sure Alec Ferguson probably doesn't get it at all in his area. Typical. But so the key about this is how do you address that market failure? In the borders, in our rural areas, our young people are having to move to find jobs. We need to take our jobs to our people. We need to put the infrastructure. I've got about 7 miles of dual carriageway and 4,500 kilometres of roads in Dumfries and Galloway. That was the 20th century connectivity infrastructure. What we're talking about here is the 21st century infrastructure. That's why this investment, if you compare it to the roads expenditure, is small, but it's absolutely crucial to our area. But also, I think, to address some of the demographic issues that we face in rural Scotland, about how do we provide the services to where our elderly live, not take them to where we have the services. Well, I can't do that if I don't have the connectivity, the modern infrastructure to put the technology into their homes. So this investment, small in terms of the Scottish Government's £30 billion budget, absolutely crucial to, I think, the future of rural Scotland.
How are the organisations that are here funded by the proposed investment? What is their core function and where do they operate? I mean, HIE has got particular kinds of functions. BT has particular kinds of functions. How does this process of next generation digital fit into your overall plans?
If I understand the question, Chair, I'll just answer that initially. Clearly, we are doing a significant commercial deployment, as Gavin alluded to earlier, throughout the UK. Just to recap on that for members' benefit, spending about £2.5 billion across the UK, commensurate in Scotland. That programme is going to complete in spring next year. So if I look at that from a Scottish perspective, it will mean between ourselves and other industry players, which is predominantly Virgin, obviously that's quite strong in much of the urban Scottish patch, we're going to see something around about 67–70% coverage of Scotland of high-speed broadband. What we are doing and what we have bid in to do this partnership with both the Highlands project and the rest of Scotland is to bring the same capability, the same technical capability to bear in achieving the coverage targets that I think you are familiar with. And we believe that's critical because I know from talking to people throughout Scotland, many of your constituents, that not only do they want speed, but they want choice. And the infrastructure that we're deploying here gives choice of service provider. As we speak just now, there are something like 80 communication providers providing services on this network across the UK, and that will grow, and that ranges from the obvious ones like the retail arms of BT, Sky, and so on and so forth. And it's sustainable. So the outcome of all this, in my view, will be that someone on a high-speed broadband service in Gavin's area in southwest Scotland will have exactly the same choice of provider and cost, and critically evolution of service as I receive in Edinburgh, where I live.
And Alec Patterson.
I mean, in terms of your question, Convener, about how it fits with our plans, I mean, we have in our business plan, our operating plan, the very clear statement that the Highlands and Islands needs to be a digital region. And it's as basic and as simple as that. We're an economic and community development agency going forward. Access to superfast broadband and its exploitation is right at the heart of all we do. You cannot really operate in the commercial world from a business point of view. You look at the productivity enhancements without having access to this. Many of our most remote and fragile areas, this reduces the isolation or the issue of fragility and rurality. Many of the economic opportunities that are coming around renewable energy, other sort of things are happening in some of our remote areas. Tourists expect to have good connectivity wherever they go. It says something about the attractiveness of the region if you've got digital connectivity. If you're going to deliver digital healthcare services and public service, you have to have it. So it's one of these. I was in front of another committee on Monday, and I was making the point to the Energy, Enterprise and Tourism Committee that digital connectivity runs through almost everything we do in our individual lives, in our business life, in our communities and public services, as an attractiveness indicator to tourists and businesses and investors coming into the region. So it's fundamentally important. We started off in this process in 2009, long before the momentum built, to basically say if we don't do something, then we're accepting we will be digitally divided as a region, and you just can't accept that. So right at the top of our agenda, the Highlands and Islands has to be a digital region, not for the sake of having fibre on the ground. That is a means to an end. It's what we then do with it, but you've got to start by getting the basic infrastructure in place, and that's what the step change programmes are trying to deliver.
I have a small supplementary on this before we move to Jane Baxter.
Thank you. Good morning, gentlemen. Unlike yourselves, I'm not an expert on this, but I'd just like to clarify something. We're talking about investing a great deal of public money in infrastructure for the whole of Scotland, all told. Who will actually own that infrastructure once it's in place?
He will own the infrastructure. Yeah.
Can I ask, is that appropriate? I can understand you would manage it, but why does BT own it when it's a great deal of public investment?
Well, it's a joint investment. I mean, we are going to be investing in round numbers about 126 million in this. There's about 410 million in total. And critically, we will be maintaining and running that for the long term. So I think one of the mistaken assumptions, and I don't think it's happening here, but does happen, is that many people see this as the government, whether it be a county of England or in Scotland, buying something from BT. The procurement that's happened across the UK have been based on finding effectively a co-investor, and that's what we're doing. And we will be maintaining and enhancing this network long beyond the terms of the contract, as we have done in previous ones.
And bearing the cost for that?
Yeah. So at the end of the contract term, and I can quote the first generation broadband contract as an example, which is probably the easiest thing to do. And I think some of you will know that because you've been extremely involved in it. The first generation broadband contract, Graham, finished deployment at the end of 2005. The contract term concluded in 2010, in April. We don't switch what we did off, so we continue to invest in that network in, I don't know, say Perthshire, in the same way that we'd invest in commercially deployed technology that we've done in the more urban parts of the country.
Okay. Thank you.
And Jane Baxter, please.
Morning. Just to move on to some of the operational issues of the NGDF, and I'd like to ask, how many more addresses have been connected in the last year? And are you on target to deliver the 95% target, which was outlined by the Finance Secretary in his draft budget speech?
Well, I kick off. Obviously, two different contracts, as you appreciate, just the way it's been done in Scotland. So the contract with Alex and his colleagues was signed in late March, and the Rest of Scotland project, as we call it, in July. In all these projects, and as I say, it's similar happening elsewhere in the UK, there's a significant amount of detailed planning takes place, which takes about 6 months. So what will happen, to answer your question specifically, as a result of these contracts, nothing new has been deployed yet, but in about mid-October, I think, Highlands Islands Enterprise, BT, will be going public in our first phase deployments with that contract. You will then see phased announcements basically by quarter. And I would anticipate that certainly in the very early part of next calendar year, if not before, we're lucky, we will see the first deployments as a result of the High contract happening. For the Rest of Scotland contract, which is a bit behind that, it will happening in the same sort of window of time, rolling through to the targets. And as you know, that target you referred to is pretty ambitious. I'm very confident, partly from experience and partly genuinely from the commitment myself and my colleagues who live and work here want to make this happen, that it will get done. And indeed, if I can quote an example from Cornwall, which started a project like this some time ago with European funding. Not only is it on schedule, getting near the end of deployment actually, but because of technical innovation, genuine partnership working with the customer through that 2-year period nearly we've been working on. The amount of fibre-based high-speed broadband we've deployed as part of that partnership is higher than we originally envisaged. So I hope that we can achieve more with what we've got with Scotland than we currently believe.
Anyone else?
I was just going to say, I mean, given we signed the contract in March, we are on schedule, and later this month, this month October, we'll announce the first rollout. I mean, I think we are saying from the Highlands and Islands point of view that we'll get at least 84% coverage, which isn't your 95. But if you work on the basis that commercial deployment would have got about 20%, 21% in the Highlands and Islands, rest of Scotland maybe about 70%, to go from that to 84, and bear in mind in some areas like Orkney, Shetland, Western Isles, from 0 commercial deployment, then that's a huge step change. But there's other things we're trying to do, and we're not in any way resting at that. As Brendan says, hopefully the contract can go further. It does require other funds to go beyond where we're at today, and that's just accepted. And there's other initiatives such as Community Broadband Scotland that is providing alternative solutions for communities in particular, where the step change programmes will not get. So the 95, I think, is a 2017 target. We are saying 84% at the Highlands and Islands level by the end of 2016. But to 84 is huge. We need to cover the 16 as well.
And just to follow on from that, of the approximately 45% of properties that will need to be connected in the next 3 years to hit the target, what proportion of these are in rural and remote rural areas?
I'm not sure of the definition personally of remote and very remote, but I think if it helps, if I look at the breakdown, and you may have this information by local authority, of the total coverage we will get to at the end, I think it's fantastic. And frankly, when we started working this, I might not have believed it myself. And if I can quote an example, and I'm not sure if this counts as a very remote, but South Ayrshire, which is an area where, frankly, we need this kind of capability to help drive the economy and change the shape of jobs. I mean, by the end of this contract, we're going to have in the region of 96.5% high-speed broadband coverage, and many of the parts of Scotland that we would all feel are quite rural are going to be in and around that. Not all of them, but a fair chunk. So I think it's very positive. I think, as Alec was alluding to, with the Community Broadband Scotland initiative as well, which is I think relatively unique in the UK, a focal point that has been created here to help address the rest as best we can in working with industry, is going to be, I think, genuinely think it's a game changer. If we've got the innovative thinking as Scots to think differently about how we drive our communities and businesses.
I think an example of the south of Scotland is that we, of the 122,000 households, we'll connect an additional 80,000. So only 40,000 have the ability to connect at this point across the area, and it's less than a quarter in Dumfries and Galloway, so there'll be 80,000 more with the ability to connect. I think we also need to be clear that connecting doesn't mean that the household is connected. They'll have the ability to connect through a provider, and I think so that's why things like demand stimulation, working with our communities, getting the promotion out there in the next few years is vital to get ahead of this. So they have the ability to connect, but certainly there'll be some of the newspapers have been presenting it. That I think that made it clear to the public need to be expressing the demand to get the internet providers there to connect up.
Could I perhaps add to that, Chair? I mean, it's an interesting point. If I look at Edinburgh, because I was looking at these figures with an Edinburgh councillor recently, a number of exchanges in Edinburgh have been operational for 2 years, give or take, in terms of high-speed broadband connectivity. Now, whilst it is true to say that in terms of conventional first-generation broadband speeds in Edinburgh are pretty good, in fact, by British standards, very good, take-up on most of those exchanges that have been live for 2 years of the new service is only about 10%, which is interesting. So the infrastructure's there. What's going to trigger people to change how they use technology and get social or economic value is, in many respects, a harder intellectual question than just putting the stuff on the ground.
A convener, not a chair.
Sorry.
The questions about the development of this, we want to go further. Jane, were you wanting to go?
Just, I can't help myself, convener.
Yeah, quite.
When you say there's a big job to do about developing the awareness of what the possibilities are. Who's going to do that job? I live in Fife and I'm a councillor in Fife, and I've seen lots of very interesting things develop, telecare and lots of small businesses now using web-based marketing, and you can order all sorts of things from local businesses in Fife. So I've seen what the possibilities are, but how do you intend to promote that and raise that awareness?
Well, I can give you an example of some of the things that have already started. I made the point earlier on that getting the fibre on the ground or the wireless connections are a means to an end. It's what you do with it. So we've already established, along with Business Gateway, a range of, if you like, demand stimulation services. We've got advice, specialist advice to businesses. We're running a number of events. We're encouraging digital participation with citizens online. We have plans to roll out, again with Business Gateway, a mobile technology showcase. In other words, taking this around the Highlands and Islands, demonstrating what can actually be done. We've got plans to launch a small digital innovation grant scheme. So there's a whole raft of things already starting. I think over the next couple of weeks we've got courses running on e-commerce and so on. So the two run hand in hand, and you can't wait till the fibre's there to start the demand. And we're already sort of promoting a digital Highlands and Islands as part of our investment proposition. The fact we'll have this, what does it mean to business services companies who are looking at using home workers? You don't have to come in now. You can operate from anywhere if you've got the technology. So already starting quite a bit of this work.
That's great.
I'd just like to supplement, maybe from a community's perspective. I've got the honour of being honorary president of SCVO, and I've always had a strong interest in the third sector. And in parallel with, I guess, the business activity, I know that the Scottish Government are very cognisant of a strategic programme that will, I think, do two things. One, help drive exploitation of technology in the voluntary and third sector, but secondly, use that as a conduit. And I think back to some of the examples, I'm aware of some good work in Fife to really help people at an individual level, many of whom, with all the changes happening, are not online at all. And that's clearly not a sustainable option for a civilised society, given the trend of digital public service delivery, to be one example.
I think just the thing to say that the way that certainly in the Highlands and Islands and in the Rest of Scotland project, the partnership's been developed is the local authorities have been very much at the centre of this, recognising their community leadership role, and particularly the way that the BT have worked with each local authority on the initial rollout, because where you do it first is crucial, particularly politically, as members will recognise. And we've been at excellent dialogue there, and local authorities have accepted the lead that they need to lead the demand stimulation. The secret is, at what point do you do it? Because to do a big thing now when they might not get it to 2017 would create that expectation we couldn't fulfil. So the plans are, once we have absolute clarity on the rollout programme, to go to elected members in each council area and say, this would be the programme for your team working with BT colleagues to get ahead of the game, to create that community capacity involvement. So that coordination is essential, but it's been there right through the negotiations that I've been involved in since the start.
Further into this, Alec Ferguson.
Thank you, Convener. I just want to explore a little bit, gentlemen. I'm particularly interested in the areas that are not going to be covered, living where I do in the extreme southwest of Scotland. There will be quite a large percentage of my constituents are likely to come into that category. Now, Brendan Dick mentioned the sort of detailed work and survey work and that sort of thing that has to be gone into before any announcements can be made. Can I just ask to what extent that work has progressed? Has it got to the stage where there are now precise plans in place for what will and won't be covered, or is that still a work in progress?
Okay, I can kick off on that. I mean, I think for your particular geography, Alex, given that we signed the contract in July, we're talking roughly a 6-month window before we do what we will do with Highlands Islands Enterprise in mid-October for his geography. But through that process, effectively, it gives granularity and firms up on certainty to where we're going to go, but in a phased way. So it gives certainty of where we can go in the short term. What we like to do, and again with partners this is proven to be the best way, is try and also give some clarity of what may happen downstream, but without saying in 2016-17 you're definitely going to be in or you're definitely not, because if I take the Cornish example, life changes, and I think to say to a community you're definitely not in now might be wrong and might be doing them a disservice. That being said, Clearly, I recognise that from a community point of view, you and your constituents would want to have a feeling that if I'm really at the edge and there's no chance, I'd like to know that up front. So as part of this exercise we're doing, we want to get to that position. And I think then that's when organisations like the Community Broadband Scotland initiative can assist to help people do things faster when they know it's just really at the edge and not going to happen for them.
I think for the South West of Scotland, we know it'll be about 7,000 premises. So, even you talk about 5%, that's a big number of people not connected. There are some contractual issues that mean with the funding we're getting just now, you can't do two interventions at the same time. There are state aid issues around that. Does not mean local authorities can't do different things. There's also the rollout of the SWAN public service network, which will provide opportunities perhaps to use the infrastructure of local authorities, such as in schools, to perhaps do a short-range wireless to communities where we can't get the BT in. There's an interesting experiment. One I would give an example is a white space experiment in Annan, local broadband, where we've been experimenting as part of a pilot project of using the white space exists in the television signal to deliver broadband. Now, for commercial purposes, it isn't going to fly. But for the purposes of getting to the hard-to-reach areas, if they can get a television signal, we could get a white space signal, which means that simple things like they could do broadband, but for getting test results from health up to the valleys, we could do it that way. So we're well progressed in that, and that was launched this month. So that's the type of technologies that we're already looking to invest in. But the commitment is that by the end of 2017, everybody will have a minimum of 2 megabytes. So even though this contract has got 1, we're all committed through other interventions to get everybody a minimum of 2 by 2017. And that may well, for Alec Ferguson's area, use the British Rail radio communication masts that are being installed into Stranraer and beam off them to get into some of the valleys where we don't get a clear digital signal. So a range of interventions are already being considered and worked on, and I probably have 99.9% certainty where my 5% is going to lie. So we're already drawing our plans up for our engagement with those communities and engaging the communities about the answers.
Could I just follow that up a little bit, Gavita, because I think it's very important. I mean, I'm sure you'd all agree that if communities know where they're going to be, then they can plan ahead. It was brought to my attention that I can't remember which local authority is down south. I think it's Sutherland. They have identified very early the not spots and opened up those areas to other providers to come in and negotiate with communities, with individuals, with businesses, whatever it might be. Can you reassure us that areas that are unlikely to be reached by this broadband will be given, will be identified and notified as soon as possible, and will have other options put to them?
Yes, and you know, we're a long way away geographically, but from a Highlands Islands point of view, we will be rolling out and announcing, along with BT, on a quarterly basis, starting this month, the rollout of the next generation infrastructure. I would just pause at that point and say, if you look at the map which we've put in our paper, there are some bits of the Highlands Islands we know will not get until beyond 14 because we're laying 20 subsea cables. So, you know, without the basic building blocks, you can't put the house on top of the foundation. So we're doing that. But yeah, I mean, one of the interventions to address your question is Community Broadband Scotland. It's why it's been set up. It's to help those communities that are unlikely to benefit from the Step Change programme to take forward projects of their own, and there has to be a sharing of information between the Step Change programme and the community broadband interventions about where these projects, or where the Step Change backhaul and infrastructure is going to take us. So the two have to work hand in glove, and that takes you on to the whole community broadband offer, which is designed for those communities where Step Change won't reach, where 2 meg isn't going to be either achieved today or going forward. And there's a range of advice and sources of information available for those communities to develop their own solutions. But I would emphasise the complementary nature of the two. You know, the backhaul of the Step Change is fundamentally important to the community projects, and the communities can benefit cost-wise and otherwise by having access to that backhaul. So the two are complementary, but the sharing of the information to enable the community broadband projects to develop is vital.
Can I just finish that one, Convener? I'm grateful for those reassurances and pleased to hear that. But I have to ask, I think, in the context of the Westminster Public Accounts Committee report that came out just a couple of days ago, which is quite scathing in some ways of, I mean, it actually says that BT is, or sorry, Margaret Hodges' statement says that BT is preventing local authorities from publishing proper information on the areas the company will and will not cover, details of speed and coverage and each local product also being kept confidential, preventing other suppliers from developing schemes. Brendan, obviously, I've got to ask you to answer that.
Yeah, happy. She's wrong. I mean, okay. I would quote a specific example. Public bodies, and I think what Alex has said is absolutely right. I mean, if I can quote an example, Northamptonshire have issued information, and obviously a lot of that will be based on what we've told them, and others have, because many parts of the UK, clearly it's not just a BT infrastructure, except in your geography, that probably is the case. So public bodies, I'm sure, can and will, and exactly the approach has been taken. I think a key point I genuinely would emphasise, I had the pleasure of meeting the newly appointed director of CBS, I think about a week ago, who Alex and colleagues in government have recruited. That they are complementary, and I think that's recognised, because the opportunity, I think we've got to avoid hitting the problem where you've got two parallel things that clatter against each other. So I think my view would be, and I think CBS would agree, drive fibre and this kind of big industrial strength technology really as far as we can, recognise that CBS is there to address the really tough bits, but don't do things with a knee-jerk reaction that might obviate what would have come through industrial strength evolution. So it's quite a fine balance, but I think we're all on the same page, if I can say that, to trying to achieve the outcomes that you're after.
Perhaps to give members some confidence that was a great concern for local authorities when we were coming in and we had been asked to put up £100 million of local authority money at the front end, and there were some very difficult discussions. I had some very difficult phone calls with some council leaders to get everyone to understand the process. When we started this contract negotiation with British Telecom, we used exactly the same metrics that were being used in the English model. And we came to a number that we probably wouldn't get beyond 75%. I think it's fair to share that, because it was in public domain. So we then said, this is just stupid. Let's share all the information from both sides. We'll put the entire funding package up in front of you, so you know exactly how much money's on the table. You give us all the metrics. And then we'll get independent examination of that data. So we started the contract negotiations from both sides putting everything on the table. And through that process, we arrived at 95%. If we'd followed the English model reported at Parliament, we would have probably achieved 75%. But by putting it all on the table, and to give you reassurance about will BT be able to share, it says commercial in confidence, but I won't hold it too much if someone sees it. That's the map, that's the speech. So that was shared with all of my 32 chief executive colleagues at a meeting last week. So the absolute transparency, and at no time when I've asked for information in relation to my area has it not been provided by BT.
Well, I have to follow that up, because the consumer has to know this information, not just the councils. And the question about who will be and who will not be coming on at any particular time must be addressed, because I've got a dozen emails to respond to from my area, because BT is virtually the sole provider, as in many parts. Competition, we don't need to go into the technicalities. It's probably easier for you if you work through BT, because presumably other providers only get a quota of space on the existing scheme. And that certainly seems to work in some places. But I'd be interested to know how people can find out where they are in relation to the core network that's been set up, and indeed when. Now, you talked about a 3-monthly discussion. Is that going to give an idea to people when or where, whether they're likely to be able to get hooked up?
Information will be the sort of Superfast Open-Reach broadband website. That will be the point of one point of information, which is what's used, I think, by Brendan and his colleagues across the whole of the UK. That will be there. And there'll be different sort of categories against all the exchanges. You'll see those who are going to be, rolled out or upgraded. The first ones will happen in the Highlands and Islands between January and March, and it will give an indication at what stage the rest are at. But it is right that we be specific when we've got the specific information. There's no point in promising what we don't and what we're absolutely not certain about, which is why the quarterly updating of the exchanges to be upgraded will be the mechanism which we use. But given, and I think you've got it in your paper from us, there is a map there which shows there's a huge amount, £50 million been invested in basic backhaul, the basic telecoms infrastructure. Now, that will take time to put in, and the 20 subsea crossings, 400 kilometres of subsea cable will not be deployed until next summer. So you can see, you know, there's an obvious timeline there, but quarterly updates starting this month on that website will be the place where people can see, you know, how it's coming to them.
Brendan?
Just to agree with that, so yes, the information refresh through the contract will happen effectively on a quarterly basis, but at any minute of any day, 24 hours a day, people will be able to go on to the OpenReach website, which I think Alex said he's provided information on, and we'll see exactly where things are. And it is the same information as one gets through the commercial deployment. Just on the subsea, that's on schedule to happen next year. Just to give a bit of reassurance on that, because clearly it's a massive contract that we are letting ourselves to providers of that capability.
Thank you.
I think it's also important to say that we're very clear in establishing the contract with BT for Scotland that people need to understand that there's the infrastructure, then there's 3 tiers of internet provision. So we're very clear that in putting the infrastructure in, which BT have the contract, when they sell on the use of that, they sell it on to BT's other arm at exactly the same price that they will offer it to every other provider. So that was very clear when we set in the contract. And as a sort of equity issue, so there's effectively the rail, and then there's who's going to use it. So what we said is that rail price can only be sold at the same price that you offer it to everybody else with no restrictions. And I think that's where I think there's some confusion, and certainly in the evidence that went to Parliament in England that came out, that we were very clear from the start that we're putting an infrastructure and investing in an infrastructure, and that infrastructure must be open and available to all of the providers to buy.
Yes, if I could just supplement that. I mean, I think a number of you around the table have enough knowledge of the telecoms industry for historic reasons that under state aid legislation, effectively that's a requirement. So the retail arms of BT that sell as a communication provider buy capacity and services from OpenReach, who are deploying the network in exactly the same way as Sky, who's got a big competitor of ours in one respect as well, as an example. And critically back to, I think, Graham, your point, what that means is that once the contract technically is concluded, that carries on, because it's just part of normal network investment. And as I say, 80 providers in the UK already on the network for the high-speed services, and that will grow.
Can I, if I may explore something? We're hearing today about 2 very specific projects in the south of Scotland and the Highland Island, but in the middle of that, 14 local authorities engaging with BT, trying to drive localised provision, very specific to their areas. Brendan, I wonder if you can update us on where you're at with that. I obviously have an interest, Angus Council's involved in that, where we're at with that, and also how that will progress in terms of what we discussed earlier about advising people in these localities of when the rollout will happen and to get them prepped for that. I mean, will it be done local authority by local authority? Will it be done on a ward basis within that? Will it be left to the councils to oversee that? How will it work in practice?
Sorry, when I was referring to what local authorities were going to do, I actually was on the infrastructure board in negotiating the contract on behalf of all local authorities. So you're absolutely right, 14 have invested further funds in, but all local authorities are involved in the programme, because a number of local authorities will hit the 95% with no real intervention. However, on the rollout programme, all local authorities are going to be involved in working with BT on how that is communicated. And in fact, all local authorities have been involved in helping to influence that rollout programme, because there are a number of issues that BT couldn't have done in it. So one of the big ones is we need to recognise is we're going to dig up most of Scotland to get this infrastructure in. I mean, the 75 could be very interesting down in my ward, and I'm pretty sure up in Angus it'll be the same, and in your town centres. So therefore, it's really important local authorities are involved in that, and one of the key issues will be the road planning authorities, because there'll be we're putting in, I think, enough cable to go to Sydney and back a couple of times. That will be going into the centre of all our communities. So you can imagine the issues. So yes, the programme of engagement, all local authorities have already engaged about the rollout, influencing the rollout, talking about perhaps some of the sensitivities for BT. And from this point on, all local authorities will be in charge of coordinating and communicating the rollout with BT in their area. So, because it's really important. I mean, I can't sort of overemphasize here the challenge in doing this in a 2-year period with the amount of cable and all of it slap bang in the centre of our communities. To coordinate that, to make sure that BT doesn't become the roads are shut for 6-month pariah, is going to be an enormous exercise. That's why local authorities have been engaging very heavily up to this point, and I'm sure for Highlands, from the point of the contract and the certainty of the rollout, it becomes a heavy investment of local authority commitment to make it work.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the Highlands Islands contract is a wee bit different because we're managing the contract on behalf of all of the public agencies, local authorities in the Highlands and Islands. But, you know, my Director of Digital and Brendan and his colleagues do regular roadshows round all the local authorities, as Gavin says, have to be intimately involved because there are planning and transport, because this is an engineering project fundamentally at this stage, so that has to be done, and you know, we do extensive briefings and so on. So all the local authorities are very heavily involved in the Highlands and Islands. Just the contract is managed in a slightly different way.
So to be clear though, if these 14 local authorities are putting in a little bit extra for specific purposes, are there individual work streams going on there, individual engagement on that additional work specific to those local authorities?
With and through the central project. So we're managing it, and I think this is important very much as obviously a strategic programme, taking cognizance of those inputs, and that dialogue is happening. And at this stage, as Alec and Gavin said, it's very much about building it, clearly. But as I alluded to, speaking at Constance Falkirk, and I'm sure I'll be doing more, it's, I think, in everyone's interest to make sure that intellectually complex engagement about what we're doing with it is vitally important, and as I think we would be doing ourselves a collective disservice if we didn't try and make that work.
Yeah, I think in South Scotland we're investing 21 million, and I think it moves us. I have to be able to demonstrate to my members the 21 million pounds is given that additionality. Also for state aid and other reasons I need to do that. And for us, we're looking just now, and that without it, we probably would have been about 84%, and with our investment, it will take us up to 95%. And I'd have to say, since we've moved from 75 to 84 to 95, the chance is that by the time we get to 2017, we might have actually achieved as close as we can, higher than that. Yeah. But to say that, yes, one of the key, for each 14, we have to be able to demonstrate back to each local authority the additionality. But actually, we have to demonstrate back to the government that additionality as well, because they are two separate funding streams that need to be clearly developed for money. So I've already at this stage will be able to go and say it's somewhere between 9 and 10, and as we get closer to the rollout, I'll tell you exactly how much additionality, and the maps are shaded green.
Just to maybe just add in terms of, I think the ambition, it's, again, some may know this, but as part of a contract like this, should take up exceed the anticipated business model, it's inappropriate and legally wrong for the provider, in this case BT, to take all the benefit of that. So effectively, a thing called the clawback mechanism kicks in. So the customer, and in this case two separate projects, but will get an apportionate share of that investment back, and which could be, doesn't have to be, it could be used to reinvest further. It will be interesting to see how things go. As I said earlier, not seeing massive take-up yet in some of the urban areas but deployed, but as someone who knows rural Scotland pretty well, I've no doubt that take-up adequately encouraged and supported will be high, and I'd like to think that, you know, if there is money then available for reinvestment because take-up is high, it just does stretch that boundary a bit further.
Thank you.
We've got quite a number of questions still to ask, and a limited time to do so. Jim Hume?
Convener, and good morning, gentlemen. Brendan, Dick, you mentioned CBS, Community Broadband Scotland. Of course, they were given £5 million from Next Generation Digital Fund. I just wondered if you knew if any, and that was, of course, for championing community-based solutions. I just wonder if the panel know of some of these community-based solutions, some examples, some of the costs that have been involved in those community-based solutions, and of course how much value or additionality, I think is a word that's used, that has provided.
In terms of detail, to be honest, I don't. I mean, the kind of, I'm aware of a couple already and I think one up in Alex, your patch, which is, I think, a wireless-based solution. I think it's early days, fair to say. I think experience elsewhere, sorry, just in England, where some of the similar concepts do see different technologies applied. And I think it is in communities where, frankly, they've got nothing just now. So additionality is both economic, but clearly social and community as well.
Mm-hmm. To give you some facts and figures, the CBS team are currently working with 43 community groups across Scotland. There are 6 pioneer projects, and one of them has already been allocated funds, which is in Applecross, and the 5 others that are the pioneer projects. One's in Colonsay, Tomintoul and Glenlivet, Corgaff in Aberdeenshire, Elvenfoot, South Lanarkshire, and News Valley in Dumfries and Galloway. So there are the 6 pioneer ones, and then there's another 43 already expressing interest. And the way CBS works is that there's I feel like three phases to the whole process. The first one is community engagement, and that's about mapping what's there, what is the size of the challenge, and so on. What sort of community support is there for the project? And currently there are 28 projects at stage 1. Next stage is project planning, which is about the planning is the business planning, it's the technical planning. What is the appropriate solution for this particular community? And there are 8 at that stage at the moment. And stage 3 is capital assistance, and we can award capital assistance up to a state aid limit to help implement. And the pioneer projects are working their way through that. In fact, there are 6 there just now, with Applecross actually already having been awarded just over £68,000 towards their wireless project. So quite early days, but that's the sort of volume of activity that's currently in the pipeline. I think I'm right in saying 191 inquiries have been received, but there's 43 community groups that are the advisors, and there are 5 advisors spread across the whole of Scotland. They're working with these sort of numbers already.
Sounds like there's quite good progress, yeah.
From Nigel Don. This seems to me to be enormously important, but because my concern is for those who are going to be in the not spots, not those who are going to be covered, actually, because I'm really sure you're going to make that happen. I'm very grateful that you will. One of the things that I thought I picked up from one of the submissions to us is that these community schemes will probably leave communities in the hands of one provider rather than with a technology which is available to all possible providers. Am I right on that? Because it seems to me that that is a significant concern.
Let me answer that, because I think in my submission I said there's the possibility, and I've seen this going back over recent years, that that's something to be factored in. Now, it may be the only option, because as I said earlier, I think collectively we want to push the big industrial strength, CP neutral solutions as far as we can. There will be somewhere inevitably it may just not get there, and they may end up with one provider. So my observation about that is what is critical is not just to ensure that if I can call it the capital investments there to build it, but critically there's the ongoing operating cost support and frankly human involvement at a community level to sustain it, because there have been many examples across the UK, not specifically in Scotland, where with the best of intent communities have done their own thing, and then the guy who knows how it works moves, and things fall down.
Right, because if I could just follow that then, but why, for example, if a village like Mirrykirk in South Aberdeenshire, which I represent, is too far away from North Waterbridge apparently to get a good signal, why could not BT, as part of the bigger process, use some sort of satellite technology to get the technology on the ground? Don't worry about the cable and then distribute from there.
So that may well be, that's the sort of things we're looking at. So, I think, I don't know if Alex mentioned, but in his project there's an innovation fund. So clearly our primary focus is deploying the big stuff, right? But we are investigating a range of options. We've done a white space trial that Gavin alluded to in Butte, which was quite successful, but has different challenges. We're looking at LTE technology. We are looking at, and I think this will be interesting, using wireless to take the signal from the exchange to the cabinet, which could be quite far out in the community, and then the conventional copper from there. So there's different things there. So as far as CBS is concerned, we genuinely, and I had my meeting with the new director last week, want to play an active part, not just in building the big stuff, but offering our solutions where we have them into the other areas.
So does that then suggest, forgive me, I don't want to get this to its extension, that part of what CBS does might be to engage you to do exactly the thing we've just talked about, to provide a solution which looks like you did it, but actually came from that fund because it's too far away.
Well, if ours is better than alternatives, I guess so, because they will be looking for the best option from the market for what they're trying to do. And if we have a good option, yes, and if we don't, no, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the point. I mean, your opening comment, I think BT hopefully has a role to play in CBS, but it is not exclusively a BT role. And will one provider own all the technology? Probably not. And I think the starting point with CBS has to be twofold. One is there's the basic core infrastructure, the skeleton of fibre, which ideally community broadband projects should connect to because it gives you the backhaul. But the solutions for communities will be developed in the communities. But what's best for them? A mix of different technologies.
Yeah, thank you. Just briefly to look at that point, in terms of the truly hard to reach areas, when we talk about innovation and thinking out of the box, I think I'm right in saying there was a council in the north of England actually loaned the money to a satellite provider to, as that was the solution for that area, at a good rate of interest for the council. Is that kind of thinking coming into play here in Scotland?
CBS, and very often we get fixated with the £5 million startup fund, and £5 million is to run CBS as well as give the grants. But a core part of the CBS offering is the advice, technologically, financial, business planning, and so on. So every situation will have a different solution, different funding package, different technology mix. So if that's an option, well, all options are on the table in terms of how these things are financed. The Step Change program, not the Step Change, the CBS program, the £5 million fund, cannot fund whole projects, cannot do it. State aid rules, prevent us from doing it. So there may be communities who are generating income from other sources. There may be private businesses in these communities who choose to sort of contribute to it. There may be innovative loan funds available that could plug the gap. So we're at an early stage, and I think it's technology. Let's see what the right solution is: satellite, wireless, white space, whatever else. Well, that's wireless, and funding solutions. Let's be creative. Okay, thank you,
Jim. You.
Yes, thank you very much, Convener. It was just regarding these hard to help areas. Alex, you mentioned that the Highlands and Islands project would see it from 21 to 84%, which is fantastic. So it's all good work, of course. I'm sure it's similar in South Scotland, where I represent. But of course, that leaves 16%, which are perhaps not going to be helped at all. So it'd be interesting to see what barriers are there, what are those barriers in those what seems impossible places to help, what they are. And it would also be interesting to hear your views if you think the Next Generation Digital Fund actually does provide enough cash to overcome these barriers.
So the Next Generation Fund is providing us with what we need to do, what we're set out to do. And I agree with you. The 16 looms into focus, but getting to 84 from some cases nothing is hugely important. What are some of the barriers? Geography, distance from exchanges, technological challenges, which is why new technologies and new ways of doing things are actually vitally important. But I would really important that I emphasise that 84 and whatever more we get with the Step Change programme is great. We're as focused on the 16%. And that's where, as Brendan says, in recognising that within the contract we've got an innovation fund. We're not quite sure what we're going to do with it yet, but it is to take technologies that are currently in the labs and deploy them. And first call is into these areas. The second thing is Community Broadband Scotland, which is there really for the not spots. And then the third element of it is, and I'm surprised you haven't asked me the question, but maybe it's the last one, do we have enough money? No, we don't. And we will need more money to go beyond where we are today to get out. And everybody recognises that, Scottish Government recognises that. There's more money available through UK Government to do this. And the model we've taken in the Highlands and Islands is we haven't asked any local authorities to contribute to our project so far. It's funded by ourselves, BT, UK Government, Scottish Government, and we are saying, look, that's what we can guarantee to deliver. So when we ask local authorities, and we're having this discussion already, if you know you're getting X% at the local authority level, by putting so much more on the table, we can go from where you are today to where you might be. So there's 4 or 5 different strands, if you like, to the bowl, which we've got in terms of going from the 16, from the 84 to the, to the, ideally the 100, but certainly the 95 by 2017.
Brendan.
Very much to Jim's question. I think the other factor in the mix clearly is population density out in the rural areas as well as distance from the exchanges. But I guess a question I've been asking myself and talking with friends and colleagues across Scottish society with is I'm not aware that whether in a Scottish or a British level we have done analysis that looks at the relative value of different kinds of capital investment. So investment in telecoms compared to investment in roads or rail or whatever it may be. My gut feel for rural Scotland is that if that analysis was done, given that government's got a limited amount of funding available, understandably today, it would be interesting to see what comes out. And I'm not saying one does one to the exclusion of the other, but I think that kind of work is something that would be sensible as a country for us to understand better.
Jim?
It was just to follow on from that, and something Gavin mentioned about sharing information. I think that was with BT. Of course, we've had 2 projects in rural Scotland, south of Scotland Alliance, and of course Highlands and Islands Enterprises project. Just wondering how much cooperation has been between the two. Have there ever been thoughts of amalgamating your project to get economies of scale, perhaps, and work in cooperation, or has it been more competing for funds between yourselves?
I'll give my answer, and hopefully, Gavin, you're going to agree with me. No, I mean, the reason why there are 2 projects is simply that we've been working in this for quite a while, so we were ahead of the rest of the Scotland project for some time. So it made sense, given we were already over a year into a competitive dialogue process, to conclude it. Gavin and I both sit in the Digital Infrastructure Programme Board, so we were both equally cited in both projects. And what is maybe more important now going forward is that both projects, in terms of the delivery, I've got staff working on it, but we're working hand in glove with the Scottish Government's digital team. So we're not competing in any way. We're joined up, we're sharing, but there's a timing and a procurement issue, not an issue, but difference, which is why we've got 2 projects, or 2 contracts.
From the BT perspective, as an explanation as why 2 contracts, but our resource on this in Scotland is headed up by a single unit. So we've got a group programme director, our Openreach programme director, a colleague called Andy Hepburn, happens to live in Perth, is responsible for what we do in both projects. So we're obviously conscious that we need to maximise the thinking, minimise the costs, etc., for both projects.
Thank you. Thank you, Convener. Good morning. I'd be keen to get an indication before we go any further with regard to where we are compared to the rest of Northern Europe. You've touched on funding just in the past few minutes, and I certainly don't want to rain on your parade, as you're clearly very upbeat on rolling out the programme. However, can I ask, are we playing catch-up in Scotland compared to Scandinavia? For example, how far behind Norway and Sweden are we with regard to the rollout of next generation broadband in rural areas? Or indeed, is it the opposite? Are we ahead of the game?
If I can give a view, maybe not so much in Scandinavia particularly, where that I think there's been more government investment early, but if I compare it to our big competing nations, I think we're way up there. I mean, I know there was reference in the pack last week, but the independent research I've got, if I look at the G8 countries, we are second in the UK in average broadband speeds, and ahead of, and this is important, ahead of all our major EU competitors in terms of availability and price. So back to that point about the open network, people have got a choice between cheap and cheerful and much more sophisticated. It's very good. Our deployment is the fastest it's happening, I think, globally. And interestingly, I think some of you know that 2 or 3 years ago, I think Australia announced a massive investment of money to achieve a very big ambition of high-speed broadband across the country. The approach they took at the time has struggled, and they're now looking at the approach. I don't just mean BT's technical approach, but the approach that Scotland and Britain have been taking to achieving the outcome as a model for them now. So I think we're well up there.
Okay. Brendan's got the facts. I mean, I think all I would say was, if we weren't doing this, we would be way behind. This is preventing us getting into a catch-up or a divided situation. Whether we're ahead or not, I'm not entirely sure, but this is vital to make sure we stay competitive.
Okay.
So, Gavin wants to say something.
I think we need to recognise that some of the problems that the Westminster Parliament picked up related to the fractional nature of each local authority area putting bids in. I mean, and obviously I communicate with the Cumbria Chief Executive, and they just salivate at what we're going to get in Scotland, because what they've ended up with isn't really very good. I mean, their gap area is far larger than in Scotland. I think that to say that we would have super fast broadband for up to 90% or 95% and a guarantee that someone will have something 100% by 2017 will put us in a fantastic position to move forward. And that investment, you know, I think only came about by pulling two major projects together. I mean, the Rest of Scotland project could have been 7 or 8 different procurements, and easily, I mean, we in the south of Scotland were well down procuring our own with a huge cost and investment. So by having a single plan for Scotland with 2 key projects, I think it's the economies from that procurement process have been fantastic, but also I think the learning we've been able to take. I mean, I was trying to sell a 75% deal to 27 council leaders. So when I went back and said, actually, it could be 90 or 95%, that was fantastic. So I think we are well placed. I think where the challenge might come is having perhaps a Scandinavian approach to how do we then use it. And I think that's perhaps the next debate, is how do we ensure we get the maximum benefit from the infrastructure? And I think that's probably where we can learn from our Scandinavian cousins.
Okay, indeed. Could I just briefly touch on the figures in the draft budget? Given your planned activities over the next 3 financial years, will the profile of the draft budget affect these operations with regard to your project timetables?
The budget allocated to the rural affairs budget, I mean, I think from my perspective, I understand that to be part of the bigger Next Generation Fund. So we have an arrangement or agreement with government in terms of a profile of calling down that funds over the period between now and 2016, which they're aware of and we're aware of. So I think that's been factored into the profiling.
I think to say that it's a £400 million project between the pair of us, and the numbers look small in the budget, but part of the reason for that is that in relation to the EU funding that we've had, ERDF funding, that has to go first. Yeah. That has to be applied to those areas, as we call it, the white areas, the areas definitely hard to reach with market failure. So therefore, it does look low in the budget, but it relates to the fact that the other external funding and the application of local authority will go in early, and then the government funding comes at the back end of that programme. But the numbers have very much been agreed through the government team to profile it moving forward. But certainly I think 40 or 50 million, the European money will go in first as the first tranche, because that has to be expended, I believe, by the end of 2015.
So the 40, 50 million is ERDF funding?
Yes, it's European funding. There's 2 different funds in there, but yes. But the reason for that is that has to be spent first on the hardest to reach areas, which again is why it's that then impacts on the rollout plan. That might not be where BT may have wanted to go first, but in relation to the funding. So that's another complexity that we've had in trying to work our way through this.
Okay. Thank you.
Finally, Graham Day.
Thank you. The Scottish Government has said it's prioritising next generation broadband connection for, and I quote, rural, small and medium-sized businesses to encourage economic growth in hard-to-reach areas. And beyond that, the draft budget is estimating that next generation has the potential to deliver $2 billion in economic benefits over 15 years. Can I ask, in terms of your activities, where business connection sits in relation to domestic connection? Is it the case that domestic connection in the short term will dominate, but with the anticipation that when there's good broadband access, rural businesses will start up? And can I also ask whether you've been directly involved in the modelling of this projected $2 billion economic benefit, or are aware of the evidence that supports it?
Okay, well, from Highlands Island's point of view, the coverage figures relate to premises, whether homes or businesses, whatever else. So our project will get to 207,000 premises, the Highlands and Islands, houses, businesses, whatever. Our rationale for getting involved in this back in 09, 010 was, yeah, my kids would love to watch iPlayer without it sort of buffering and everything else, but it's an economic and community development rationale for it, which has spin-off benefits in terms of us as members of the public and so on. So the business dimension of this, the competitiveness, everything else is vitally important. I think our teams have been involved with the Scottish Government. We did a wee bit of work ourselves at the early days of this, which suggested that we might be a £70 million GVA uplift per annum in time from this. So, you know, the economic benefits are, you know, very significant, you know, through this. But it's not just a consumer-focused thing. It's very much got to focus on businesses. And we're also, as part of the project, making sure that where there are key economic development opportunities, so from the convener's point of view, Scrabster and places like that, these places where we're trying to grow a renewables industry, or the Inverness campus, which is a fantastic resort, you have to make sure that these economic development hotspots, if you like, can have the digital connectivity as well.
Just supplement that, I think, and you're all like me, I'm sure, so you work at home some of the time. So I think there's a significant fuzziness in the modern world between work and home, or business and consumer, if you want to use that phrase. And I think for part of the reasons Alec alluded to, I mean, education, kids at home is critical. 60% of new businesses in the UK and in Scotland today tend to start up in the house originally. So I see it as very much a mixed bag. I think on the SME sector particularly, the statistics that are available would suggest that the percentage of SMEs in Scotland who work online, around about 75%, hasn't changed a lot in recent time. So there is a lot to do there. And I think critically, if you look at the information available from organisations like McKinsey's in Boston on the trends in the global internet economy, the opportunity is massive. It's just a question of getting our brain round it based on the infrastructure. And I think, as you've been alluding to, Graham, really trying to work with local authorities and Business Gateway drive some of the messages out.
In terms of the point about the modelling, Gavin, Brendan, have either of you been involved in that, or are you aware of the evidence that supports the assertion?
Involved in the Scottish Government evidence, but I do, and I think I referenced something in our short submission. We've been involved last year with a company called Regeneris, who did an independent review looking at actually different geographic economies in the UK, but again, they were tending to show, I think Norfolk, Suffolk was one area they looked at, which is pretty rural, that there, even today, you can see an uplift in GVA of between 0.3 and 0.5% a year for 15 years. So it will vary by geography, but I think most people recognise that the opportunity is pretty high.
I think that we did some work, and we were going out to procurement, and the paper that I produced for the South Scotland Alliance, we were anticipating a 9-to-1 ratio for investment at that time. So 2 billion might be too low, it might be too high. I think the difficulty of making such projections, doing that at a time of economic difficulty, you know, if I can maintain the number of jobs in my region, that might actually be the success. So I think, you know, it's to bandy it about, but definitely know that without this investment, then we're reducing the future for our rural areas. I mean, I think that's that if we want them to attract high-paid jobs. I mean, Dumfries and Galloway now is the lowest average wage in Scotland, from one time being amongst the highest. I need new industries. I need to keep my people there, so I need to create that employment opportunity, and this is the infrastructure to do it. So I think I never get a chance to answer the last question. Give me more money, and I will do even more with it, because, you know, I could throw money at roads. My backlog in roads is 200 million. Give me 200 million in digital infrastructure, and we could have, you know, a small business sector connected to the rest of the world. At the moment, it isn't.
With those thoughts, I think at the moment we're going to have to draw this session to a close. I'd like to thank the witnesses for your contributions, and I've no doubt we'll be speaking to you again quite soon to see how all of this is actually rolling out. But from the point of view of our budget, thank you for your evidence. We'll take a brief suspension just now to allow for a changeover of witnesses. Start with the next panel, looking at the draft budget scrutiny for the rural affairs, etc. element of the Scottish Government's budget for 2014-15. And we welcome the panel of witnesses, Paul Hendry, Director of the Scottish Flood Forum, Philip Mackay, Head of Service, Roads and Landscape, Aberdeenshire Council, Lisa Webb, Land Use Policy Officer, Water for RSPB Scotland, and Dr. David Pirrie, Executive Director for the Scottish Environment Protection Agency. And we're going to kick off with our questions as quickly as possible. First one from Claudia Beamish.
Thank you, Convener. I was going to say good morning, everyone, but it is indeed good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. The Flood Risk Management Scotland Act, as we know, transposes the EU Flood Directive into Scottish law. And the Scottish Government has highlighted the importance of this in relation to climate change and also the determination to create a more joined up and coordinated approach to flood risk management at a national and local level. There are a range of partners who work on this whole area, including, just to highlight, landowners, local authorities, SEPA, Scottish Government and Scottish Water, and of course some NGOs as well. Could I ask, in the budget document, the government has stated, and I quote, "Through our work in partnership with SEPA, local authorities, Scottish Water and others to deliver the Act, we reduce, the determination is, and I quote again, to reduce the number of homes and businesses adversely affected by flooding." Could any of the panel, as a starter question, please tell us how the coordination and cooperation between organisations involved in flooding is working and might be improved, and whether there is a sufficient budget to support this, and who is not receiving support if they should? Over to the convener.
I'm happy to start off. Yeah, we're making excellent progress. It's working really well. I think it's useful to step back and think about how we're progressing with the Act, and it's in 4 big steps that we're progressing with the Act. The first step is identification of the areas that are most vulnerable, and actually that's largely complete. That step, you'll be aware that we published the flood risk assessment in December 2011, so that's complete. That's the first step. The second step is very much about identification of where the floodwaters go and the damage that they will cause. And that's the next big milestone that we're about to reach. SEPA is about to publish flood risk and flood hazard maps in December of this year. And these will be a big step forward. They're going to outline the risk of flooding in a high, a medium, and a low likelihood scenario. And they're going to identify where these floods and the impact on receptors, so things like number of properties, transportation links, community infrastructure. So that's a lot of the evidence that will base the decisions. And the step that we've really just begun now is on really producing what we call flood risk management strategies, and they're about bringing together that consortium of partners that you outlined. We've published guidance on how, or we've worked together to produce guidance on how we will produce those strategies, and then that will be then used by our partners to produce the local flood risk management plans that will be coming out. Consultation will begin in December 2014 and finalised by June 2016. So we've got a range of groups working at local levels, at national levels, a range of partnerships, and it's beginning to take shape and make progress.
And a comment on sufficient budget, please.
Comment on sufficient budget. Yeah, that's a difficult question, and you're going to look for really a nice, simple yes/no type answer from me.
I hope for it, but I never.
I don't think I can give you an answer like that, because the stage that we're at the moment is very much about identifying the evidence. Until we get all of that evidence together, until we really see the plans and know the areas that we can afford to fix, and maybe more importantly, those that we can't afford not to fix, we don't know what will be needed, and we're just at that stage. But we do reckon, there have been funding identified as part of the last spending review. It was agreed that the flood capital grants to local authorities, 42 million per annum, should be ring-fenced. So there is some funding in place. But what would be really helpful for us would be, we want more clarity on how future funding will be distributed, as it would really aid the development of the flood risk management strategies. And ideally, this would be really useful to have this in advance of the spending review period of 15-16 and the strategies that will be published in December 2015. You can appreciate that if there's uncertainty on how the mechanism's going to work, it hinders progress with the development of those strategies. We're doing really good work. So, yeah.
Just a moment. Nigel Don on this point. Yeah, thank you. Can I just pick up with the panel the comment that 42 million, whatever that number turned out to be, isn't really very much. You don't get much for that in the capital world. Am I right in thinking that the strategies which are being developed are ones that recognise that by and large if the water comes you can't stop it, and it's actually mostly about working out how you minimise the damage that it does if it arrives?
Yeah, I think that's as we develop the schemes that will go into the local flood risk plans, there won't be a physical intervention for each problem area. I think that's quite right, that the prime responsibility for protection of a residential or commercial development rests with the owner, and that will maintain. I think what we are looking at as we develop schemes in the potentially vulnerable areas is schemes that provide the largest positive cost-benefit analysis, and I think, to go back to the previous point, that's the schemes where we possibly can't afford not to take physical intervention because the impact of such a flood is so devastating. So I think the plans, as they develop, and they are still at an early stage, I would have to say, as they develop, I think we will get more clarity on the level of capital funding that will be required to make interventions in these areas where we can't afford not to.
So you're trying actually to work out the areas where you can't afford not to, because that's what really would define the capital that you would want over a period.
I think as we go forward in doing that across the 14 local flood areas, that is what all the partner agencies are looking at. But as well as that, there is the requirement to promote flood awareness and to actually use these other tools to build resilience into local communities. It isn't all about the physical interventions, and the flood risk management plans won't solely focus on the physical interventions, but that is obviously a major element of what will come forward for what will be a 6-year programme on the plans, a 6-year life before they're refreshed. So it is sort of, I think, while it's an iterative process the first time it's been done at a national level, it also is important we get it right because it will guide the funding for the next 6 years after they're approved in 2016.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, RSPB Scotland very much welcomed the Flood Risk Management Act and the fact that sustainable flood management was at its heart. As Philip mentioned, we don't have the flood risk management plans yet, and that's going to be from 2015 onwards. So whilst I don't want to comment on the specifics of the budget line to local authorities in terms of flooding, it is important that any funding to them is dependent on those measures being sustainable. So that would be our big point there.
Thank you very much. Okay, Angus MacDonald.
Thank you, Convener. Good afternoon. If I could go back to the Flood Risk Management Act that Claudia Beamish raised at the beginning, can I ask panel members if you believe the Act has allowed for the development of new methods to enable the public to contribute to manage flood risk through, for example, the Scottish Flood Forum and NGOs within Scotland. Can you also tell us if there's sufficient funds available to support this engagement with NGOs and the Scottish Flood Forum?
Paul?
I think one of the problems is there's a certain amount of consistency across the whole of Scotland regarding support to local communities. And that really is dependent upon the engagement specifically with local authorities. So, for instance, if we could take Dumfries and Galloway, which based a property level protection scheme on the Scottish Border Scheme, but then developed it that much further, they provided quite a number of products which were available to the community at a subsidised price. And figures from that show a very real positive take-up when we consider comparable figures into other areas. So, for instance, the take-up of the subsidy is 120 properties, with 206 properties actually applying for that subsidy. Now, these figures are accurate as when the snapshot was actually taken, which is actually about 60% take-up, which is really quite high. When we look at a community like, for instance, Comrie, Perth and Kinross Council don't specifically have a property level protection scheme apart from the deployment of synthetic sandbags, which are very good but are ideal and probably better for low level flooding. As soon as floodwater reaches anything above about 6 to 12 inches, then probably you need to look at other factors. Comrie at the moment is suffering from a real problem, as is Stonehaven, for instance, with insurance. And many of the insurance companies at the moment are specifying particular types of product. For instance, Kite Mark approved products to particular British standards, and as much as possible, an automated protection scheme. So, for instance, traditionally we would have given people a choice of a barrier method across the air bricks on a house. There are now products on the market which allow an automatic air brick to be put into the property, which automatically shuts off water going to the underfloor void. So in that sense, local authorities need to understand that there has to be an ongoing development to keep pace with both the requirements of the insurance industry and also the property owner. If we take Aberdeenshire Council, for instance, now they have a property level scheme in place, which works quite well. The only problem we have there is what we have found out following a recent survey, is that there isn't enough variety of choice. Now that will obviously, as soon as you begin to increase choice, you're increasing cost. So therefore, we would strongly support additional measures being made available to local authorities to be able to fund appropriate property level protection. If we take Fife Council, for instance, we've just completed a survey of over 800 properties in Fife, and they are looking at rolling out over a 2-year programme property level protection, which again will be subsidised. And we're looking probably at subsidy of about 60%, 50-60% to the products, which again increases the take-up to people who are at vulnerability and particularly at risk.
Okay, thanks. Apart from extra funding, which you've mentioned, what can be done to encourage local authorities to introduce property level protection schemes and automated protection schemes, for example in Comrie or the area that covers Stonehaven?
In fairness, I have to give you the response from the local authorities that really comes down to budget and the affordability of these products. Some local authorities have moved quite quickly. For instance, Highland Council did a limited scheme. We've certainly seen the effectiveness of what Aberdeenshire Council have done. The difficulty there is the additional funding that is required to roll out the bigger choice of products. And I think the incentive is there. I think the very fact that they have the degree of flooding that is within the locality is sufficient impetus, and certainly from the communities, there is a very loud voice requesting this, but it does come down to availability of resources, and particularly financial.
Okay.
That was really useful, and I think we're in the, we like to think of flooding as avoid, prevent and prepare, and we're in the prepare area here, and SEPA's flood warning schemes, so you're very familiar with the flood forecasting service and the floodline service, but what we're talking about here is community engagement, and it's worth maybe highlighting some of the work that we've been doing on community engagement in this area.
You too.
Yeah, so in areas like Comrie, doing work through schools, through community engagements, and Comrie is a specific example mentioned there. Through that sort of thing, the new flood warning scheme, through having letter drops, drop-in sessions, school sessions, 40% of the community have signed up to flood warning schemes. I think that's a really good success story and shows how effective those sort of schemes can be.
Okay, Convener, just a slight supplementary. Just picking up on the flood risk and the flood hazard maps that you mentioned earlier. Is that through the LiDAR system?
Yes.
Okay, you said that would be available November, December. Are these maps going to be available to the general public rather than just local authorities?
Yes, they will be available to the general public. They'll be prepared in December of this year, and they'll be available through on SEPA's website through a web browser. And they'll be quite scalable and zoomable. You'll be able to go in and look at different areas. There'll be different filters that will search on it, and you'll be able to look at the different sources of flooding, whether it's from surface water, coastal or river flooding. You'll be able to look at the different risks and likelihoods of flooding. You'll be able to see its impact on a range of receptors. So things like houses, railways, infrastructure, that sort of side of thing. And you'll be able to see things like the potential depth of flooding and the velocity of the water as well. So they'll be quite detailed, and I'm sure you're familiar with these web-type products where you can scale in and zoom in areas and see different ranges of detail. They are very impressive.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Jim Hume.
Thanks, Convener. Good afternoon, everyone. The Scottish Government's draft budget states that it will make best use of all the available delivery mechanisms, including the renewed Scottish Rural Development Programme, SRDP, to ensure that our land resources deliver improved and enduring benefits for Scotland. In the panel's view, has this really happened in the past? Delivery mechanisms such as Common Agricultural Policy, SRDP, as I mentioned, agri-environmental schemes and forestry schemes, of course, have they been used to support flood risk management in recent years?
Can I comment? I don't feel they've been used in a way that is delivering much in the way of flood risk management. We'd also certainly be concerned if in the future SRDP was going to be relied upon to fund sustainable flood management. That most definitely must come out of local authority budgets. We also, as you possibly know, think that full use must be made of the flexibility between the pillars of CAP, to move the full 15% from Pillar 1 to Pillar 2 to increase the amount of agri-environment spend that there is, and that's really important. It's also important to say to get flood management on the ground, we need to look ahead in longer term agreements. As you know, SRDP agri-environment money is for 5-year agreements, and that's simply not, not sufficient to secure flood management on the ground.
But other panel members, do they have a view on this?
I think I would back what Lisa said to a certain extent, but I think we need to look at some of the more minor issues with flooding. You get quite significant water flows onto roads, onto railways. I think changes in agricultural practice in terms of mitigating that are certainly worthwhile progressing. In terms of the major schemes, in our experience in Aberdeenshire, certainly the Huntly scheme, there is quite a bit of sacrificial flooding, if that's the expression, to prevent water reaching the main receptors of the houses in the town. That is quite a difficult process to manage how that is going to be recompensed in terms of any losses that the landowner would then be faced with. And I think that's where the natural flood management approach has some way to go to possibly polish the finer details of how that is developed in the long term, where all parties are aware and comfortable of the long-term arrangements that are in place to try and manage that.
I think that covers it all, unless anybody else has anything to add.
I mean, I should say, obviously, any opportunity that can be taken to deliver multiple benefits is a good thing, and that includes flood risk management. And I think we need to be a bit wiser at looking further afield. So, for example, it's not within this portfolio, but Scottish Water's budget. So they're funded to carry out sustainable land management and drinking water catchments, which we're very supportive of. But I think it's just looking to that as well to see whether opportunities can be seized there in terms of, you know, restoring upper parts of the catchment to reduce flood risk downstream.
But the panel seems to be concerned that they wouldn't support CAP, SRDP, all these environmental schemes to actually go into financially flood prevention.
Yeah, I think
schemes.
it's just not enough.
No.
Not enough.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Okay. That's covered those points, is it? Right, thank you. Graham Day.
Thank you, Convener. I think we've kind of covered the budgetary aspect of this. I'd like to look at how we're approaching either properly maintaining existing drainage infrastructure or shaping future provision in order to minimise the impact of flooding. In the first instance, how good are councils at doing the basics and clearing out gullies and ensuring there is somewhere for the water to go in that sort of environment? And in the second instance, when councils are nowadays granting planning consent for sizeable developments, are the associated drainage requirements being matched against current expectations of usage? Or are they looking 10, 20, 30 years ahead, tracking the data for increased rainfall or the increased level of severe instances emanating from climate change and requiring provision that will cope for that going forward?
Obviously, I would say we're very good at maintaining what we have. Drainage infrastructure is an important aspect, I think, to differentiate between road drainage and flooding drainage. Road drainage is designed for a very specific function, and that's to remove water from the road surface to protect the travelling public. It is not there as a flood protection measure. It is designed as such. It basically is there to cope with a 1-in-1 year event where the system's assessed over a 1-in-5 year event. So it's very frequently inundated in terms of its capacity to remove water. If you then add on top of that the situation at Stonehaven, for example, where we had the River Carn come out of its banks, that there's no flood drainage system, if you like, that could cope with that, and certainly the road drainage system couldn't cope. So I think there is a distinction in there. What also is possibly a difficulty in upgrading that systems to provide a higher level of flood protection is that certainly in our older settlements, those road gullies will discharge into Scottish Water combined sewers. And therefore the investment and the improvement of those is really a matter for Scottish Water, who design sewers to take a 1-in-30 year load. So again, there's a bit of a disjoint, I would suggest, in terms of the 1-in-200 year protection that we may be looking for in terms of flood protection works. So I think we have systems that are there and are generally very good at doing what they do, but there's an expectation that they actually do an awful lot more than that. In terms of planning permission assessment of new build, the basic principle, if you were to remove a greenfield site and cover it as you develop it, is that the impact on the water courses should be no greater in terms of volume or time of the unit hydrograph of the water reaching the water course than it was before. And that's what the drainage impact assessment for a new development will look at. They do factor in a bit of climate change. When we're looking at flood protection schemes, I think the Stonehaven one, if I'm right, is now calculated on water levels at 2050, which is significantly increased, as you would expect, the water volumes down there. So I think that is being looked at. Where do you draw a line, I suppose, is the issue. We are employing sustainable urban drainage system, SUDS, in all new developments. So water is being treated at its source, whether that be the water from the roof of your new house, which will be treated within the curtilage of your house now before it passes on. If it's road water, it will be treated through swales or something similar before eventually reaching a combined system. So I think there are an awful lot of steps in there. Most of those are not primarily designed for flood protection, so their primary job is something else. And that's possibly where there's a slight disjoint.
You just said you talked about 1 in 30, 1 in 200. I understand what the numbers might mean. Am I right in thinking that those numbers have a currency rather like the supposed value of my house for rateable purposes? In other words, they were once upon a time what we believed and they haven't been changed, and that maybe the reality is that something that we now call 1 in 200 is going to happen rather more often, but we still use the old currency in order to understand what we're saying. Or is that perception wrong?
I would have to defer to SEPA. The 1 in 200 is just a statistical analysis of a storm. Certainly in Stonehaven catchment, we have been upgrading our understanding of that with our SEPA colleagues in the Met Office. Every time we have an event, that changes the statistical base for your 1 in 200. So it is a moving feast, but...
You're right, yeah, I would agree with that. And 2 of the particular scenarios we apply a climate change factor to. So we do them at 1 in 200, and then we do it 1 in 200 plus climate change. Right. So we do take account of climate change in the flood prediction.
So it is a rolling currency. I'm encouraged to hear that. Sorry, I wasn't sure about that. I'm just wondering if I might, whilst I'm here, convener, pick up on an issue that I don't think anybody's yet mentioned, and that is simply research. There is some funding in the budget for research. Do folk believe that what is being currently researched is helpful, important? Who's doing it? What's the money going to? Anybody able to comment on what we need to... I studied fluid mechanics 30 years ago. I mean, nothing much has changed on water since, has it? Am I being unreasonably cynical?
Within the base budget that's been allocated to SEPA, there is a small amount of money that we use for R&D funding. We use that to exert influence and partnership through other funding arrangements. Mm-hmm. So we tie up with organisations like Living with Environmental Change, CREW, people like that, who provide us with expertise and advice from the academic sector. It's a small amount of funding that we have that we use for that sort of areas of work, and it's very much about seed corning or exerting influence through other funding arrangements that are out there. We think we get good support in that area and are able to exert influence in that area.
Yeah, we would certainly like to see that funding increased because so SEPA carries out a lot of work into natural flood management research, setting up pilot projects, that type of thing, to inform our understanding of how effective these measures will be in different flood scenarios. And we think that really needs to be expanded so that we're really equipped as we move forward into this new sort of era of sustainable flood management.
I think on the back of that, we have also been involved at Aberdeenshire Council in European projects where we've been doing, I suppose we possibly call it peer learning, where we've shared our experiences with our Northern Europe partners in particular. And on the back of that, we developed a natural flood management scheme at Fetter Cairn, where we took some of the partner organisations from Europe to come and see what we'd managed to achieve working with a landowner who was prepared to allow us to do something that was a wee bit different. I think they are still research, that we're trying things that are slightly different, but learning from our peer group who are maybe approach things from a slightly different direction. That is maximising the impact we can get for the money that we have within our local authority budgets.
Well, I would say, in response to Philip Mackay, that how well gullies are maintained, how many gullies are there, and how what's expected of developers can at times come together to create difficulties in small-scale settings in villages. I have some of my own constituency, not on the scale of Stonehaven, obviously, but in that relation. But can I move this on slightly, perhaps direct this to SEPA? And in terms of combating flooding, I know SEPA have been trying very hard to engage with the farming community to tackle drainage issues in a way which support agriculture but don't create downstream consequences. I wonder if Dr. Pirrie can update the committee on how that work is going. My understanding is it's a bit patchy, it's going very well in some parts of the country and that you're encountering difficulties in others. I wonder if you could update us on that.
Yeah, you're right that we've got 4 pilot catchments, so there's ongoing work on 4 pilot catchments, the Nith, the Glazert, the South Esk and the Dee, and it's really to demonstrate the synergies between natural flood management that we talked about earlier, but also about improving the water environment and getting sort of like multiple benefits on biodiversity and access and those sort of things. It's complicated and it's difficult. It's the first time that this sort of thing's been done. We've had some demonstration projects. I'm sure you're all aware of the Edelston Water Project that the Minister launched a wee while ago that have been really successful. But there are others that, and the Allen Water is one as well that we've been doing just up from Bridge of Allen, where we're still at the scoping stage and it's difficult to get all of the partners to buy in and to actually get the landowners to it's still at the scoping stage and it's difficult to make progress. You're entirely correct that some have gone really, really well and the others have been a bit more patchy, but that's what you'd expect when something's new and it's at its early stages.
But would you accept this is hugely important work? Because if this doesn't happen, local authorities can on some occasions be left to clear up the mess, as it were, if this...
I think it is hugely important. I think it will make a really good contribution. I don't believe that natural flood management on its own will be the solution to the problems. I think it's just part of the solution.
Okay, thank you.
Paul?
Some of the work we've done on the ground, we have a lot of people making inquiries to the Scottish Flood Forum regarding specifically agricultural land runoff, particularly from that and into their own properties. And a lot of problems that people are facing is getting landowners to take sufficient importance of actual drainage and what they can do about it compared to the impacts that it's having on people's homes and communities. And I'm thinking at the moment, we've got a major problem at the moment up in Culloden Moor with an ongoing problem. This has now been going on for 2 years. And it does cause extreme distress. And somehow or another, I think we need to try to break down this communication problem of people's responsibilities and actually somehow try to get landowners particularly to take that aspect of responsibility upon themselves.
Of course, it is a fact that landowners in Scotland have a responsibility for the water courses and keeping them clear, as we know, unlike south of the border directly. Why is there no means of actually making sure that the landowner does so in law?
That's a really good question. I think partly it's to do with the fact that they choose to ignore the problem. I think also that there is a sense in which they perceive engagement with SEPA will immediately prohibit them as to what they can and what they can't do with watercourses. But more importantly, I think it also comes down to the fact that there are some tenant farmers who aren't specifically the landowners. And again, they escape the responsibility and pass it back to the landowner. And tracking down the landowner can be quite problematic.
Lisa Webb.
Yeah, just a quick point. I think we have to be extremely careful here. Clearing out drains at a field level might, solve the flooding problem locally, moving the flood water off the land quicker. But at a catchment scale, this is where we're arriving at lots of problems and, just shifting the problem quicker by moving the water off the land faster. So this is where we need a sustainable approach. And the solution is not just to, encourage farmers to be clearing out their drains at every opportunity.
I would concur entirely with what you say. definitely, yes.
I was going to, but that's absolutely the point I was making. But the issue with SEPA are not. There may be a perception that SEPA are in some way a problem. They're not. SEPA are wanting to engage positively with the landowners, and it was back to your point about breaking down this communication problem. I mean, SEPA, as I have seen in the last few months, are very keen to engage in a positive way and make sure there's no problem further downstream. It's all good, but in some places that dialogue is just not happening.
Say, I certainly don't see the problem as being SEPA at all, not by any stretch. In fact, every time we've approached SEPA to come to offer its advice and assistance and guidance to relevant landowners, they've been there without any problem at all. The difficulty is the actual landowner listening to what is going on, and sometimes their perception of what SEPA's responsibilities or control are when it comes to watercourses and watercourse maintenance.
This might sound a bit simplistic, but tell, show and involve is really important in this. SEPA as a regulator telling people what to do is possibly the least effective way for us to work. Actually showing and involving and engaging the community, and that's why it takes time and that's why it's complicated, but is the long-term solution. That's what produces the solution, the sustainable solutions that we were after.
It's be useful. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Jim.
On that very point, I've had quite a lot of casework regarding SEPA, a lot from land users, and there has been quite a lot of frustration regarding cleaning out some of these ditches, traditional open ditches in particular, where some of the licence conditions are that you don't take any vegetation from either side, which is almost impossible. Do you think there's maybe a chance to review that?
We have been reviewing that, and we have worked actively with landowners very recently on that, and we've clarified GBRs, we've clarified registrations, and we've clarified where farmers can do it on a management arrangement over a wider sort of, not quite catchment scale, but over a larger scale. And the aim of us doing that is to make it easier for land managers, but also at the same time to do it in a way that doesn't alter the ecology and does protect the wider flood management. So I believe that we have been doing an awful lot to make that clearer and easier, but just issuing it and telling people isn't the way to do it. Things like the demonstration projects that we've been talking about and pilot catchments, and actively getting our staff out on the ground and engaging with farmers is the statistics show it's a far more effective way of doing it.
And just to finish that, but sorry, apologies, convener, but is there something coming out from that review, or
I believe there's stuff. I believe there's. I believe we've clarified some of those areas, and it's up on our website at the moment. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
No, it's part of that. I think Philip wanted to ask you to answer your question.
I think if I could possibly add to that, certainly from our experience, predominantly as a roads authority, that it is overland flow from agriculture that causes some of the issues. Though it's not flow into watercourses, it's modern practices that possibly encourage overland flows. If I was just to move on to maybe back up some of the points on watercourse management themselves, we have done some extensive study work on the River Carn in Stonehaven, and because there is a perception locally in the community that dredging that burn stopped sometime in the distant past, and before that everything was hunky-dory and it was okay. The hydromorphological study we did suggests that a dredging scheme would have a very minimal impact on the capacity of the watercourse, and actually during the early throes of a significant storm, there's a significant amount of material that is washed down the burn before the floodwater arrives. So the burn is as efficient as it can be by the time the floodwater gets there. So I think there is some perception as well as reality that has to be balanced in there. And finally, I think the point Lisa made, if you don't consider the whole catchment, the real danger is that you move a problem from location A and make it a bigger problem at location B. And that is something that I think as a local authority and a lead local authority for the North East local flood plan district, that we are very keen that nothing we do actually has a negative impact on anyone. And sometimes that means you don't have an answer for the person who's currently undergoing that particular difficulty.
Well, there's a natural follow-on to this, which, we know it's funded in projects at the moment, but if there were other projects, is it the case that there are people perhaps living in places now which are just going to have an increasing amount of flooding, and therefore, the viability of that particular place has to be looked at? Particular roads, particular bits of railway line. Are these things which you as organisations have taken into account? Philip, for a start.
We certainly have through SCOTS, the Society of Chief Officers for Transportation in Scotland, which includes all 32 local authorities and Transport Scotland colleagues. We are looking at the climate change impacts, because there's obviously not just flooding, but with a wetter climate comes landslip issues, which we all know affect certain railway lines and certainly roads. There's also the potential impact on electricity substations, which can tend to be, or sometimes in areas which may be susceptible to flooding. So I think that work is ongoing on the wider climate change impacts and how we mitigate against those. We also have coastal flooding, which we haven't really spoken about today, to consider as well. And I think as we develop coastal zone management, that there may well be areas where managed retreat is the best option in the long term. And I think there's certainly other countries with significantly more experience in coastal flooding than us, but possibly have went down that route. So I think you're right to highlight there will be areas where, as this develops, that we will have to make some difficult choices, I think.
We talked about pilot studies and so on for certain aspects of flood management. Should there be pilot studies in terms of some of the discussion we're now having about coastal management, for example?
Sorry, I was just going to add to that. So I think there is some work going on at the moment with the Inner Forth Futurescape. So it's a RSPB-led project, but with a multitude of partners, including SEPA and the local authorities. And obviously the Inner Forth is a highly developed and industrial area, and that's looking at how options like coastal realignment might help to protect those communities as climate changes. And there's a lot of ongoing work in that area at the moment.
Philip?
I think to come back on the pilot studies, I've recently been invited to go and hear the outcome of some work that Transport Scotland have been involved in with the European Space Agency to actually manage and predict landslip occurrences, which all sounds very interesting and exciting. But I think these things are on the go in various sectors, just trying to look at how we mitigate the impacts of climate change.
Yeah. So in terms of this budget, we've got to stick with the kind of projects that we have, I think, by the sounds of what you're saying, and rely on other partners to begin to bring their expertise to bear on widening out this whole the whole question. But from our point of view, the budget here is what's allocated, and we're trying to make best use of it. So that's why we're asking you the questions finally just now, if there's any particular part of the way that we deploy the budget that can be best used. Yeah.
Maybe come back in. We rely very heavily on the information we get from the flood forecasting service. We rely heavily on the flood early warning system that models a number of rivers, of the major rivers in Aberdeenshire, and that ties in with the Met Office and their weather forecasting to give you a prediction of the likely river levels. I would have to say, while that information has been very, very useful, it needs to keep improving. I think as we look for more resilience from that information, as we possibly have more events, the information and the certainty of the information that we then pass on and decisions we take, for example, to evacuate a care home in Huntly, is based on very, very good information, the best information we have available. If it was slightly better, we may not have evacuated twice where there was no actual flood transpired. But with the information we have and the multi-agency approach, it was the right decision. But I think if we can keep advancing that methodology and SEPA play a key role in that, then I think all agencies are in a better position to inform the public and to take the necessary action when an event is predicted.
Lisa Webb. Yeah.
I'd like to make a specific comment, if I could, on a line of the natural assets and flooding part, which is about the Water Framework Directive line. So this funding, so it's in the breakdown of that natural assets and flooding part. This is to address historic impacts on the water environment, so it's directly relevant to flooding because we're talking about where, you know, sections of rivers have been historically straightened, and this funding goes towards restoring the natural shape of the river, you know, re-meandering it. So in the past, it's funded, for example, the Rottle Burn restoration, which I know Graham Day has had the fortune to visit, and that's been really good work. Cost about £160,000, I believe, to restore an 800-metre section. So the 0.5 million in there, you know, you don't have to do too many sums to realise it's not going to bring us too many Rottle Burn restoration projects, and we think that needs to be increased really if we're going to hit the targets of the Water Framework Directive, which do link into some of our flood risk management objectives.
If we make any recommendations like that, we have to suggest where the money comes from, other than what we have at the moment, so we hear what you're saying. Yes, David Perry.
Can I just clarify? I used a couple of acronyms earlier on. Can I just clarify what those acronyms were? I mentioned LWEC, and that's Living with Environmental Change. I used the acronym CREW, which is the Centre for Water Research. Just to clarify those. On the one thing that could make a difference on funding, I think the one thing that really could make a difference on funding is about certainty going forward. That's the thing that would really make the biggest difference for SEPA's understanding how the funds are going to be allocated in the future.
Thank you. Jim Hume.
Yes. Thanks, Convener. Lisa mentioned re-meandering rivers, and you know, obviously part of that is making sure that it stays re-meandered. A lot of work was done in the 1800s and 1900s, as you'll know, of stabilising banks throughout Scotland to stop flooding. And the most common tree that was used to stabilise those banks was ash. And of course, we have a potential threat, or we have the threat of sudden ash dieback. I just wondered if any of the members had a view on that situation and what that may have implications for Scotland.
I don't have any comments I can give you right now, but I'd be happy to pass any comments back after the session if my forestry colleagues have got any points to make.
Okay, that's fine, thanks. No.
Okay, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your contributions. We have covered quite a range of what's going on in flooding management at the moment, and indeed looked on ahead about what might be needed in future. So that's a great help in our budget questioning just now, and we'd like to thank you all for coming here, because each contribution is a help to us when we ask the ministers what they're going to do to deliver that certainty which David Perry talked about. So I end the session here by reminding members that at the next meeting, the committee will hear from the Cabinet Secretary on the draft budget and from stakeholders on climate change adaptation. The meeting's closed.